believed that the president could have a greater impact by going to Congress in person. And sure enough, it's continued ever since Woodrow Wilson, and presidents have done it in good times and bad since the early part of the 20th century.
You know, we were talking before with one of President Clinton's speechwriters. He helped President Clinton to craft that State of the Union address that he delivered while he was dealing with an impeachment trial. Do you expect President Trump to handle it in a similar way tonight?
Well, you know, Bill Clinton could be very undisciplined in some ways, but when he knew his political future was at stake, he was good and disciplined. And he was in giving that speech because it was in the middle of impeachment, but he was determined not to talk about it. He wanted to show the country that he was doing the nation's work, despite what was going on in Congress. Well, that's the theory behind what we're hearing from the White House, that the president will not mention impeachment. I think we'll all believe it when we see it, simply because this president can't be scripted. When he wants to go off script, he goes off script and expects the poor fellow handling the teleprompter to somehow keep up. So I don't know. Maybe he'll manage to do it. I think he'd be inclined to say something about Iowa if he has the opportunity, if there's something that connects to Iowa, because it simply makes the Democratic Party look bad, and he would enjoy doing that and sticking it to the Democrats who impeached him. But by and large, you can expect this speech to be triumphant, not about the fact that he's going to beat the impeachment rap tomorrow, but rather about the state of the economy, because that's his ticket to re-election. That is what is propping him up. That is what has brought him today to the highest percentage he's ever gotten in job approval from the Gallup poll, 49%. Not very high, but 49% is the best percentage he's gotten in his entire term, including day one.
And if that's the case, Larry, is there any incentive for him to try to reach across the aisle with this address? I mean, that's obviously not his style, or it hasn't been in the past.
It's possible he'll do it on trade because, after all, the Democrats did as much as the Republicans to get his trade bills passed. Now, Democrats would say that's because they changed them a lot. But still, there was bipartisan cooperation there. So if he does it, it will be on trade. But I'm not trying to be too critical, but this is not a president with a generous heart. This is not a president who is going to reach out to the other side. He spent his entire term so far sharpening the differences between Democrats and Republicans, building his base, making sure he gets an enormous turnout in November. I don't think he's going to do a U-turn now.
Right, and he and his supporters would argue that's a political strategy that has worked very well for him. All right, Larry Sabato. Larry, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll have more on what we can expect from President Trump's State of the Union address at the top of the hour.
Stay with us. You're streaming Red and Blue.
Now, the threat to our safety and to the hope of a peaceful world is simply stated. It is communist imperialism. This threat has become increasingly serious as this expansionist aim has been reinforced by an advancing industrial, military, and scientific establishment. But what makes the Soviet threat unique in history is its all-inclusiveness. Every human activity is pressed into service as a weapon of expansion. Trade, economic development, military power, art, science, education, the whole world of ideas, all are harnessed to the same chariot of expansion. The Soviets are, in short, waging total Cold War.
You can watch CBSN 24/7.
We've got an amazing story to share with you.
Let's talk about the latest developments. There's so many levels to this.
We have a CBS News exclusive.
Fires in California. What happens next, and how does it all play out?
We are on a mission with NASA.
I understand you have some breaking news. It's not over yet, is the bottom line.
This is a massive operation.
It's quite an adventure here at CBSN.
It's been a day.
see the desperation in the journey simply by looking at the trail that's left behind.
So she says she's 17. She looks kind of like she's 12.
Said to me, you know, if you tried to do this in New York City, take a picture of a man, he'd break your camera.
There's something very, very uncomfortable about this.
Today, a white supremacist blends.
This area can be the new Silicon Valley.
There was not a cot in the warehouse, not one cot in the warehouse.
We're so far deep at this point that there's no turning back. This is a long road ahead.
Our nation's capital, decisions are made here that affect all of us. So join us every evening as we bring you CBS News original reporting from around the world while keeping our eye on what's going on right here in Washington.
Wherever we have to go.
We've just flown along the coastline.
Whatever we have to do.
Overnight police were throwing the first rounds of tear gas.
Every evening we are focused.
This is the main highway to the hardest hit areas.
On finding and telling the truth.
How does that hamper or hurt our national security?
Even among the ashes, you can see the signs of deforestation.
And earning your trust.
You traveled the whole way with your son?
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
Good morning to you and welcome to CBS This Morning.
Understanding the world.
We're going to begin with breaking news.
Begins with the right questions.
Have police discovered a motive? Does the president have a red line here?
What can voters expect to see today?
Join Gayle King, Anthony Mason, and Tony DeCopel on CBS This Morning.
We know a little more this morning. This is a major development.
This is a very serious situation.
More news every morning on the show everyone is talking about.
We have much more news ahead for you.
CBS This Morning.
Last week, the Supreme Court reversed a century of law that I believe will open the floodgates for special interests.
Iraq continues to flaunt its hostility toward America and to support terror. The Iraqi regime has plotted to develop anthrax and nerve gas and nuclear weapons.
We know big government does not have all the answers. We know there's not a program for every problem. We know and we have worked to give the American people a smaller, less bureaucratic government in Washington.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano with Lana Zak here at the CBS Broadcast Center. Thank you for joining us.
In just about an hour, President Trump will deliver the final State of the Union address of his first term.
The address comes as 2 articles of impeachment still hang over him. The Senate is expected to vote to acquit Mr. Trump on both of those charges tomorrow.
The White House says the president does not plan to mention impeachment in his address. Instead, he plans to focus on optimism and will highlight the nation's economic and military strength.
The speech comes at a critical time for President Trump. A recent CBS News poll found most Americans have mostly negative views of the State of the Union. 56% said things were fair or bad, while 44% said they were great or good.
Meanwhile, CBS News has also learned that at least 9 Democratic House members plan to boycott tonight's address.
During his address last year, President Trump appeared to rally against partisan divisions and instead called for compromise.
But we must reject the politics of revenge, resistance, and retribution, and embrace the boundless potential of cooperation, compromise, and the common good. Together, we can break decades of political stalemate. We can bridge old divisions, heal old wounds, build new coalitions, forge new solutions, and unlock the extraordinary promise of America's future. The decision is ours to make.
So let's go ahead and bring in Leslie Sanchez, Joel Payne, and Molly Hooper. Leslie is a CBS News political contributor and a Republican strategist. Joel is a CBSN political contributor, Democratic strategist, and former Senate leadership aide. And Molly is a CBSN political contributor and a veteran Capitol Hill reporter. So, Leslie, the White House says the theme for the president's speech is the Great American Comeback. What issues does he plan to highlight tonight? Why?
His own personal comeback. Everybody thought Bill Clinton was the comeback kid. It's certainly going to be this president in terms of impeachment, riding high, taking the victory lap on the economy, taking the victory lap on many of those critical swing states that are now seeing that his policy is going to argue, and deregulation, supporting support the tax cuts, are all parts of efforts that have continued to accelerate the growth. And of course, we'll probably hear that it's at historic levels, which we can feel that there's going to be a little bit of pushback on that. But the president's going to be riding high, all of those things, but looking to immigration. That's one of the areas I think we're going to hear talking about. It is something that energizes the base. We're in a political year, and he's going to say he's going to continue working to build the fence, and he's going to continue to have Mexico pay for it.
Molly, as we continue to keep our eye on Capitol Hill, are there any issues that we expect the president to mention that could, in fact, have some bipartisan support?
Well, I think mentioning infrastructure, who isn't for better roads, right?
Yeah, sure.
Who isn't for better schools?
Right.
Broadband, it's great. The problem is, how do you pay for it? And that's where the rub lies. Mm-hmm. But I do think that there are compromises to be had on prescription drug costs, The House passed a bill last Congress that was going nowhere in the Senate, but Senator Grassley, Republican, is working with, I believe it's a Democrat, Ron Wyden, Finance Committee on those issues, and they may be able to come to an agreement that the White House could sign on to, which would actually be a big win this year because health care is such an issue for everybody in this election. So there's a possibility. But I'm going to be interested to see how, if he does bring up immigration, Democrats have some interesting investigations regarding the president and immigration and the border. So we'll see who's clapping and who's sitting on their hands.
Obviously, impeachment is the thing that the White House says that they're not going to be addressing tonight following the Clinton playbook, it looks like. Quick roundtable. Is that the right decision? Leslie, start with you.
It's the right decision, but will it be the president's decision? We don't know that.
Well, look, I think the president, certainly his advisors are going to tell him he doesn't have to necessarily talk about impeachment. He, for their purposes, has already won. We know this president likes to freelance and go off script. So let's just say we should all be ready for anything.
That's right. I think he will touch on the investigations that Democrats are going to continue to pursue into other matters of his administration, but they also may call John Bolton on the House side. Democrats are still in control of that chamber, and it's just a question of how far they will go to pursue this president and investigate.
That's certainly going to be one of the messages politically. It's not so much, but the tone of that will be here. That I was able to do these things despite the fact I had a Congress that was working against me. When we could work together, we saw, trade agreements move forward. We saw
criminal justice reform.
Criminal justice reform. We see some positives. Certainly, we'll talk about health care. And that's going to be kind of threading that needle that when we work together, we get it done. But most of the time, you're working against me.
So what about Republicans, Leslie? What is it that Republicans especially are going to be listening for in this address?
Republicans just want to get through the night, really, it's like, crossing an icy, it's like crossing a road, an icy road in high heels. It's one of those moments. Perilous. You just, we're on a good high right now. He's coming off such great momentum, and he always manages to, despite himself, to change the subject, make it about himself, and kind of not listen to the better angels, so to speak. So we're hoping that he can move some of those policy agendas forward so we can see the direction. This is really about laying out, you need me for 4 more years. This is what my plan looks like. That's why this State of the Union is so critical. If you don't lay anything out, then how can people possibly envision it?
Well, and that's the whole point of State of the Union. It's an address to Congress. It's a message to Congress about what the president intends to accomplish the next year. with Congress,
right?
Because he is the chief. I mean, you could argue that the president sort of is this executive legislator, but he's not. You know, he needs Congress's approval for a lot of the things he wants to do, and so he really is discussing what he'd like to accomplish with them.
So let's go right to Congress and bring in Siobhan Hughes. She's a Capitol Hill reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Siobhan, as we mentioned, there are at least 9 Democratic House members who plan to boycott the president's address. Who are they? Why won't they be attending?
Well, there are people, as your reporter just mentioned, like Ayanna Pressley, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who feel that after what happened with impeachment, they can't. It's simply not appropriate to sit and listen to a president who they basically feel should be removed from office.
Joel, let me ask you about Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. She's going to give that Democratic response. We know she's from that critical battleground state of Michigan. And in the excerpts that we have, she's going to be touching on a lot of bread and butter issues that I know Democrats always say that's really the priority, despite the impeachment coverage, despite the impeachment talk in Washington. So I wonder what you think that messaging says about the direction that Democrats plan to kind of focus, especially given the fact that, you know, November really is just around the corner.
It really is, yeah. She's going to talk heartland. And, you know, it's notable that the folks who tend to pick these folks who give the State of the Union responses come from Washington. They are the Nancy Pelosi's and the Chuck Schumer, the ruling class, so to speak, of the Democratic Party, and they want to project an image of a center-left party. And so I think that's the kind of message you're going to get, a message that appeals to the middle of the country. Something else that's notable here is, you know, around this time in most kind of out-party presidential cycles, the leaders of the primary start to become the titular voices of the party, right? The people who are the leaders, right? So normally around this cycle in 2016, Hillary Clinton, 2008, Barack Obama. That hasn't happened yet here. Democrats, for all intents and purposes, Nancy Pelosi is still the most prominent spokesperson for the Democratic Party in the country. And that does present a challenge because where you want to pass that torch to a new generation of leaders, likely your presidential nominee, that hasn't happened yet. There's some issues in Iowa, which we've talked about a lot tonight.
There are?
But there's also a very split Democratic Party.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's a night like tonight is a night where that comes to the top, that rises to the top. Those types of issues tend to hurt you. We'll see if Democrats can unite around the message that Governor Whitmer presents tonight.
Well, and you don't quickly, you know, just the partisanship starts right away. Republicans have put out a statement saying that 60% of the individuals in Michigan do not approve of her leadership in the state, that she's very unpopular, she has failed on her promises. And so they're going on the attack, just showing you how competitive that this state is going to be, especially among working class voters.
11,000 votes. I mean, the presidential election, I mean, isn't that what Donald Trump essentially won Michigan by? 11,000 votes. That's a tough race, especially when you have Gary Peters, who's a senator from Michigan, up for re-election this year. There's going to be a lot of battles to be fought.
Yeah. Certainly a lot. And Siobhan, while you're there, can you tell us anything more about the mood there on Capitol Hill?
Well, I just came from the Senate side where the two parties are each engaged in their respective dinners, so there was kind of a jovial mood at that point. Nobody has really stepped back from the brink yet, stepped back from the anger and frustration and incredulity that they expressed at the closing arguments. And of course, there is that big vote in the Senate tomorrow on convicting the president. So I would say feelings are really still raw. It's probably going to take a lot of time to mend relationships. And while there are some Republicans and Democrats who can work together, for example, a group on the House side called the Problem Solvers Caucus will all be sitting together, Republicans and Democrats wearing purple. That is not really representative of where the Congress is right now.
Siobhan, I'm wondering what you're hearing just privately behind the scenes about what the president is actually going to say tonight, with Republicans obviously in lockstep when it comes to this issue of impeachment. Nevertheless, they would like to tout the economy. They would like to focus on those kinds of bread and butter sort of issues. Are they saying anything privately about the fact that maybe he does go off script tonight and there's something else entirely that they get asked about in the wake of whatever he says?
Republicans very much know to expect the president to go off script, that he goes in a direction on impeachment that they don't want him to head. It's something that they have had to deal with throughout his entire tenure. The problem this time, of course, will be that they can't hide behind no comment or say, I don't know, I wasn't there, I didn't hear what he said because I haven't watched television. They, unfortunately for them, will be in that chamber. And so if he goes off script, they're going to have to address it when they come out of that chamber.
Molly, you look like you want to jump in on that conversation. Go for it.
Well, here's one thing that the president may have in the back of his mind. He wants a bipartisan vote to acquit, right? And Doug Jones, or a Democrat in Alabama, and Joe Manchin, for that matter, in West Virginia, still have not said equivocally which way they are going to vote, unequivocally. And so perhaps in the back of his mind would be, Mitch McConnell I can just see how this is playing out like, Donald, if you want to get those acquittal votes, be good tonight. Just be good.
Wow.
You can't rub salt.
I'm sorry. I just want to interrupt you guys for 1 second because we are just now getting into our newsroom some excerpts from the president's State of the Union speech. And what we're seeing in here, as Elaine and I are pouring through it, a lot of talk about the economy. Of course, you guys were predicted this properly. The president said, from the instant I took office, I moved rapidly to revive the U.S. economy, slashing a record number of job-killing regulations, enacting historic and record-setting tax cuts, and fighting for fair and reciprocal trade agreements. He also talks about how he intends to build the world's most prosperous and inclusive society, one where every citizen can join in America's unparalleled success and where every community can take part in America's extraordinary rise.
He also talks about, quote, we are restoring our nation's manufacturing might, even though predictions were that this could never be done. So, it's interesting. He will go on to say, quote, many politicians came and went, pledging to change or replace NAFTA, only to do absolutely nothing. But unlike so many who came before me, I keep my promises. 6 days ago, I replaced NAFTA and signed the brand new U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement into law. Joel, let me go to you first. What's your reaction to some of that?
Well, look, this is what Democrats were concerned about when they gave him that victory on USMCA. And a lot of Democrats feel like it's good policy. So it's not about giving the president a victory. It's about passing good legislation. The president is certainly going to use that as a tool. I haven't had a chance to pour through this at maybe the rate that you guys have, but I'm looking for the name Barack Obama in here. And here's why. When the president's really in red meat mode, he tends to do a lot of Barack Obama did this, I'm reversing the Obama agenda. If he doesn't, that tells me that they are really shifting into a general election mode, and the president is starting to think about those independents, people who don't like it when he talks in that negative tone, and people who.
So if he doesn't name check President Obama.
But you said job-killing legislation, or job-killing regulations, but he didn't say Barack Obama's job-killing regulations, which is significant again because that's the president's style. So if the president is pulling back stylistically, I do think that tells us something about what the political calculations are in that White House.
Whether or not he sticks to the exact script as written is very much another question.
Another interesting thing, and I'm going to throw this question right to you, Leslie. The president also talks about health care, which we know American voters, it's their number one issue, and he pledges to protect people with pre-existing conditions. And then he says, and according to the excerpts, I will not allow socialism to destroy the health care in this country.
That is a direct ad. That's what we heard on the Democratic debates coming from the Democrat contenders for president, is the Medicare for all, is wiping away employer-based health coverage, of wiping away private insurance, increasing premiums, increasing costs, and putting government in charge of your health care, which frightens, a large percent of the population. And so that is the strike, and that is directly coming from the Democrats' response.
And when he says that, I want to keep an eye on those 30 Democrats in Trump districts, won districts, and I want to keep an eye, because if you see which Democrats are standing up or at least applauding, which Democrats would not be necessarily happy with the Bernie Sanders as their standard bearer.
Yeah. On trade, we were talking about trade earlier in the evening. He will say, or he's expected to say, according to this excerpt, quote, days ago, we signed the groundbreaking new agreement with China that will defend our workers, protect our intellectual property, bring billions of dollars into our treasury, and open vast new markets for products made and grown right here in the USA. So again, on this sort of economic question, Joel, where we have seen as I was talking about earlier in the evening with correspondent, the idea that the president had promised 3% economic growth, but in 2019, the U.S. economy only grew by 2.3% as a direct result. Many economists say, by the way, there you see President Trump looks like getting ready to depart, or is that the motorcade only? Okay, no sign of the president just yet, but the shot is up, and we'll bring it to you just as soon as the president does depart the White House. But the idea that the president's trade war with China was really responsible for, many economists say, putting the brakes on U.S. growth last year, this would seem to be a direct reference to that, and essentially saying, look, there was a larger goal here in mind, and I accomplished that.
Yeah, and it was a real pain point for a lot of people across the heartland of the country. That trade war was really waged on the backs of working farmers and, people in the agriculture community that the president had promised to look out for.
They couldn't export their goods.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so I think the president will obviously expend some capital tonight trying to maybe claw back some rhetorical high ground with those folks. But picking up on a point that Lana and Leslie were talking about earlier, related to how the president is going to talk about things like socialism. One thing I will give this White House credit for, the president has learned how to rhetorically start to create wedges for Democrats. He knows that socialism is a wedge issue for Democrats. He also knows that this trade bill is a wedge issue for some Democrats. Even Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, there is a difference of opinion there on whether or not they should line up behind the president or they should go in another direction. So I will give the president credit for learning from his mistakes of the past or some missteps of the past, and I think that his team is going to continue to try to do that tonight.
I also want to point out, we had a second just to say, he does have a line in there that the United States of America should be a sanctuary for law-abiding Americans, not criminal aliens. Exclamation point. Just want to point that point out there. And he will tout his unprecedented efforts to build the border wall. That's so critical here because many Republican voters feel that Republicans have failed after numerous promises made to secure the U.S.-Mexico border by land, sea, and air, and they failed consistently. And this was tantamount to the president's reelection campaign, is that he showed he was able to deliver.
Something that I noted, Molly, when the president talks about foreign policy, he will say, or is expected to say, quote, as we defend American lives, we are working to end America's wars in the Middle East.
I just highlighted that.
So, it was not that long ago that we saw members of the president's own party very vociferously protest what the president was doing with respect to foreign policy. Can you just remind us of the context? So when we hear this tonight, it will be some of the president's own Republicans, that very much have foreign policy at the top of mind.
Well, going back to when the United States went into Syria to help out, the rebels against the Syrian government after the chemical attacks, that was a big deal for a lot of Republicans and Democrats that didn't want to take that step. And then he just withdrew them. Mm-hmm. He just decided in just last December, was it last December or the December before last, to withdraw. It's one of the reasons why General James Mattis, who was the defense secretary, was like, I'm out of here. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, this just doesn't make sense. But part of that is because he wants to withdraw troops from Iraq, the region, because mm-hmm. that was one of his campaign promises. America first, let's get our troops home. It's a big thing for Rand Paul and some other libertarians. But recently, with the strike on Soleimani, who I'm sure he is going to be highlighting, I haven't seen the name, but I'm sure he'll mention it. In Iraq, of this Iranian general, sort of the head of their defense, their armed forces, that took the United States into some pretty precarious places because it was almost as if we were going to be going to war because the Iranians struck back and hit a few, outposts essentially in Iraq, U.S. outposts. But it's a problem because Congress is like, no, we're the only body that can declare war, right? And so they took these steps to essentially say, no, you can't go to war with Iran. Mm-hmm. But here he is making this promise. So I think that I'm going to watch to see which Republicans stand and which Democrats stand. Yeah. Exactly.
So another thing that jumps out to me, even just the framing of this, and Lana, I think you laid it out at the beginning, the great American comeback, that's how the president is framing this. And look, again, a skill that Donald Trump has is how to package and market something. And it's interesting, the president that started his presidency with American carnage, right? The idea that America was just this wasteland and that Barack Obama left a complete and total mess. That's really not the case if you dig into the numbers, but it behooves the president to tell that story tonight. And I think that that's going to be an important part of his 2020 reelection strategy as well.
And in the speech, he says we shattered the mentality of American decline, not necessarily that and it's anything more than mental. But it is, at first glance, a very optimistic speech about the future of the country, which stands in sharp contrast to that inauguration speech. And Joel, I don't know if you've noticed this yet, but there is a reference to the Obama administration that he says in 8 years under the last administration. So perhaps not saying it by name.
That slippery White House.
Well, but they didn't say his name. And the president loves to say his name.
Well, you know, the night is young, my friend.
That's
my
right.
wise friend, the night is young. I thought it was interesting. He does do a kind of a hat tip to the law he signed that was Ivanka's effort, his daughter.
I was just going to ask you that about
You know,
Leslie.
it was the new it was basically the law providing new parents in the federal workforce paid family leave. It's part of her initiative. She has really worked on, and she wants to expand to corporate America. She wants to set the federal example so that other companies, and in many cases, other companies have already kind of done that to increase the benefit of their human capital. So.
Yeah. I also imagine we might hear the president talk a little bit about the First Step Act, his very much ballyhooed criminal justice reform legislation, which was the subject of the Super Bowl commercial that we saw a few days ago.
Pretty compelling ad.
The president is making a pretty bold claim and outreach to African American voters. I think particularly African American men. I would not be surprised to see the president talk a little bit more about that tonight. I don't know if we have reports of who's going to be the folks that he's invited. A lot of times they'll have somebody in the box that the president wants to use to highlight a story. I know last year's speech there was at least one person who benefited from the First Step Act. So I imagine that the president may want to underscore and lean into that as well again.
Actually, so that's a good question for Siobhan then. Siobhan, do you know anything about who President Trump intends to have in his visitor's box sitting next to First Lady Melania?
I think I saw a report of, I think there's a family from Philadelphia who's coming. I'm not really clear on what the message is supposed to be that's associated with each of the guests, though.
Sorry, it's such a kind of a wild card question for you as we're learning all the new details. I don't know if you've seen the president's remarks as they are prepared for delivery right now. And of course, we continue to watch there at the White House as President Trump will soon make his way over to Congress to deliver his State of the Union address, his fourth, and what many Democrats hope will be his last. But certainly this is an optimistic speech that in a lot of ways also reads as a campaign speech.
Yeah, we'll also be looking for those reactions from the crowd. We know that actually all of the I know at least female Democratic caucus members will all be dressed in white to kind of mark the women's suffrage movement. But you often in these moments see collective standing and clapping or collective sitting down. Nancy Pelosi, as a speaker and a Democratic leader, tends to be the signaler who leads that effort, and she leads it with an iron fist.
And she's also going to be signaling, cool your jets. She doesn't want her caucus to get unruly and yell things out as the Republicans did a long time ago when Barack Obama was giving an address.
Absolutely, and that's very important too. I think Democrats, it's important that as the president is riding this mini wave, that they don't exacerbate that by giving the president more rhetorical points to underscore.
It is interesting, and when you look through the speech and what he's talking about on the campaign and lauding his accomplishments, this is about momentum. So not only is it about positivity and, I made my promises to you to make America better, make America great again. I've delivered on these very difficult things that have never happened with a traditional Republican president. I've come in it with a very different style, and it's working. And this is what I see for the next the road ahead. These are the big challenges, and this is where I'm headed. We don't see necessarily that yet. We see more accomplishment, but that's really the interesting part to listen for. And this is the time to make it. It may be the last opportunity the whole country can come together. If he gets tied up in impeachment, it's almost looking backwards, the rearview mirror. If he's really pushing forward, then that's going to tell you he's focused. And the team has gotten him focused. And I think that's going to be a really important point.
And again, I think that he's going to react to the crowd. And again, this is one of those instances where it's, standing up, sitting down, standing up, sitting down, and you're very cognizant of which factions, so to speak, are sitting up and standing down, are sitting up and are sitting down and standing up. I know, stand down. But and he likes to engage. I think it was the last inauguration when the president acknowledged that the most number of women were elected in a single class, and then they all start clapping. He's like, "Oh yeah, I give you props for that," and it was a very spontaneous moment, but he reacts to that. And so I think, again, if he's keeping his eye on Adam Schiff and Jerry Nadler and these individuals who have been leading this charge against him, I don't know if he could resist temptation to dig a little bit, maybe, but
No, there's a lot of faces in that audience.
That's true. They're like, focus on these.
Right.
I mean, one thing we don't see in these excerpts, Leslie, Iowa. Any mention of Iowa. However, would you venture to guess perhaps it might make a mention, at least a very quick one, because it would seem to be, as we were talking about last night, in Iowa, a political gift, essentially, to the president.
It's been a great gift, and he's already been tweeting about it.
Yeah.
I think hopefully he's, gotten that out of his system, and he's moving forward. So he didn't miss the opportunity.
Yeah.
He just used another method to convey his.
You don't think he'll
his
say
thoughts.
something there at the State of the Union on it?
I don't think so. I think he's got some big things to move forward on, and it's really interesting how he's going to convey that and the work that needs to be done. This is really the moment to convey that. So looking at Iowa is kind of like a small effort in a much bigger puzzle.
This is really an interesting time that the speech is coming to. Again, the night after the Iowa caucus, Michigas, whatever we want to call that. It's coming in the midst of the impeachment row. It's coming really at a really chaotic time. You wonder how many people in the country are really rapt in paying attention. You almost feel like this might be a moment where some Americans, I know we all want them to be tuned in with rapt attention to what we're saying, but you wonder whether some Americans are just in a mood to maybe take a time out, and whether or not I'd be curious to see what the viewership will end up being from this State of the Union versus previous State of the Union. This is just coming at a really, really busy time. In the last 3 days, we've had the Super Bowl, we've had the Iowa caucus, we've had the end of the impeachment trial coming up tomorrow, and now we have the State of the Union. That's a lot for the American psyche to handle at one time.
Though it might have just gotten everybody revved up and ready to watch impeachment.
Wouldn't you want to see what he has to say after he's been going through impeachment? Oh my gosh, right? It's a spectacle a little. It could be. It's not necessarily a spectacle, but it could be a spectacle.
Well, for the 75 million people that are on Twitter and get the feeds, and we're constantly looking at all the different things he says, and we're very well aware of where his mindset is. But for other individuals who really are just starting to pay attention to this and want to hear the president's read, they may or may not attend a rally, but they want to know what he's thinking in terms of direction of the country, as opposed to the personal attacks. If he can split those two things apart, he stands to have a really good evening.
That's a really good point, too, because there are a lot of people who watch what President Trump has to say on Twitter, and those are either big President Trump supporters or people who are really anti-President Trump, or all of us in the media. But for the vast majority of Americans who will be making a decision in November whether to give President Trump another term, this might be the platform in which they hear him articulate why he believes they should.
Right.
So I want to go through, we have a list now of the guests.
I was just going to say, to Joel's point.
And again, these are obviously, as we've seen, there are the senators walking outside, I'm told there. You see. We're going to continue to keep our eyes on.
Those look like actually congressional pages.
Yes, those are the Senate pages following the senators. The senators all line up, and then they walk down to the pages following them.
I was looking at my paper. I did not look at the screen. My apologies. But on this list of State of the Union guests for the president and the first lady, this is often a place where, as we've discussed before, priorities and statements are made about what the administration in office values. And it's interesting to note, one of the guests here, Leslie, is Ivan Simonovis from Caracas, Venezuela, chief of police in Venezuela, imprisoned in 2004 for protecting protesters who escaped to Fort Lauderdale, Florida in 2019. An interesting choice because if I recall correctly, it was his former National Security Advisor, John Bolton, who was very heavily involved in pushing the idea of regime change. Is that correct? With Maduro and Juan Guaido. What do you make of this choice? What is the statement to be sort of the message to be taken away from this?
Super strong message in terms of fighting for political freedom, and there's a stronger line now, especially as it comes to these types of regimes in Latin America. I think that's a very strong position for the president. It's consistent with the administration. You just don't hear a lot about it. But it's something certainly that's going to have a very strong response, I believe, in Spanish language media and certainly in Latin America.
And incidentally, I had seen reports earlier in the day that Juan Guaido was going to actually be at the State of the Union.
I was just looking for actually a reporter's reporting on that. I haven't found it yet, but I will see control room if we can pull that up. I believe it was a note from Finn.
Yeah, because we remember all the humanitarian aid and all the different efforts trying to feed the children and the starvation and all the the dramatic crisis, the humanitarian crisis that was taking place, and the U.S. efforts to engage in that, and that's part of a consistent effort to protect the plight of these individuals seeking freedom.
We have also learned that among the First Lady's guests will be Kelly and Gage Haig from Stillwater, Oklahoma. And here is President Trump, First Lady Melania. They're walking now to the motorcade. We understand that the motorcade is already filled with reporters who will accompany President Trump and the First Lady then over to the Capitol, that drive down Pennsylvania Avenue. A short one, but one that's imbued with so much significance, of course. So let me finish that thought then. Kelly and Gage Haig from Stillwater, Oklahoma. Kelly is a military widow whose husband was killed in Iraq by a roadside bomb supplied by Soleimani. She will be with her son, who was 1 when his father died. So there's Soleimani. Even though we didn't see it in the excerpts,
that's right.
It's definitely.
But that's exactly, and that's the reason why he would say the U.S. took the action it did to attack Soleimani, an Iranian who was in Iraq at the time that he was killed.
We see the president now waving at the folks as his motorcade is starting to take off. That's a sign, perhaps, that he is in a good mood as he heads into the State of the Union address. Sometimes he doesn't wave at the press when he sees us all sitting or standing there.
Well, he's got his game face on. Somebody also, I worked
there you go.
I worked in
Thumbs up too.
I worked in Senator Reid's leadership office about a decade ago, and so I've done a couple of these State of the Union response statements. Which one? And I hate to kind of pull the veil back here, but they're done before the speech is even written. So we kind of know what he's going to say. Sure. They kind of know what we're going to say. So we're already kind of backed up into our corners. Maybe it says a little something about Washington.
There you see House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Vice President Mike Pence. Continue,
yes,
Joe.
No, but I think it'll be interesting to see what the unified Democratic message will be. If it's done right, Gretchen Whitmer, as the official Democratic respondent tonight, will amplify what most Democrats are saying when they come on programs like this, when they put out their statements, when they're tweeting things out. There should be a unified response statement to the president. In this time that the president is really having some success, I'm really curious to see what Democrats are going to push back on. Are they going to push back on economic issues that the president tries to highlight tonight? Are they going to push back on some of the foreign policy things, the Soleimani case that you just cited? It'll be really, really compelling to see what Democrats try to focus on in terms of a means to push back on the president's comments tonight.
And now we're starting to see those senators filing into the House chamber. There is Utah Senator Mitt Romney smiles while so many questions, as we discussed earlier this evening, about how he will ultimately cast his vote regarding whether or not President Trump should be acquitted on the impeachment trial or impeachment charges. There is New Jersey Senator Cory Booker. We're flipping back and forth pretty rapidly, but what's interesting as I see all those senators starting to file in there is that for the most part, we see a lot of smiles. We see people in a good mood. It's kind of a reminder that even though, as we've talked about, these extraordinary times and the unusual circumstances in which the State of the Union address is being delivered, that for members of Congress who have heard these speeches over and over again. This is an opportunity for everybody to get together, kind of a gigantic family reunion. And for our viewers over on the right, that is Statuary Hall, where all of the reporters and staff are all hanging out, waiting to catch various members of Congress and other Washington important politicos as they have their thoughts about how the State of the Union address
Lana, in a
transpired.
previous conversation you were having with Congressman Getz, you kind of joked a little bit about who he would bring as a date from the other side of the aisle, and it does kind of harken back to a time, one of these State of the Unions, I believe one of the Obama State of the Unions happened after the Gabby Gifford shooting, which is actually what started the whole idea of finding somebody from the other side of the aisle to sit with.
Right, and because that rhetoric that had led up to her shooting had been so intense, and many people questioned whether or not that type of incendiary rhetoric, and I remember in particular a meme that was posted that had her caught in crosshairs, whether that had prompted
the same thing when, at the congressional baseball game a few years ago when there was a shooting. And I hate to highlight that on a night like tonight, but those were kind of flashpoint moments for Democrats and Republicans to find opportunities to come together. We're entering another period of time where there's a lot of tension and there's a lot of division in the country. And it's interesting that this was not sought out by either side as an opportunity to do that. Now, look, we're in the midst of an election season, but again, it was something that I noted that this was a real opportunity, Elaine, for Democrats and Republicans to do that.
It's striking too as we look at this tableau continue to unfold. This is one of those traditions where Americans do look and have expected in the past a tone of unity, a tone of togetherness, that whatever kind of bruising political fights have taken place over the course of the previous year, that in fact the rhetoric, at the very least, was expected, I think it's fair to say, to be lofty, soaring, and unifying. It's fair to say. But it's striking now how expectations have changed. There we see Ivanka Trump, Jared Kushner as well. But the fact that in this impeachment trial, for instance, that has taken place, when you compare it to, say, 1992 and the impeachment trial of Bill Clinton, as I understand it, the senators during that trial actually worked together, Democrat and Republican, to have that process kind of fall. I'm sorry, your apologies, 99, yes. But have that process come through in a way that was not so acrimonious. There you see Senator Ted Cruz, versus now where you have members of the president's party standing up and saying that they do not think what the president did was correct or right, but they cannot, in fact, go ahead and vote to remove the president from office.
Well, you have to remember that back in '98, when the House is voting on that, number one, the full House shot down. They killed two of the would-be articles of impeachment. Mm-hmm. That's one thing. So that was a Republican-Democratic vote. Also, on the two articles that did make it to the Senate, both bipartisan votes. And on the article of lying, perjuring yourself, that had, almost 30, I believe it was almost 30 Democratic votes. And even on the final charges in the Senate, 10 Democrats voted with the Republicans. And so I think that was a much more bipartisan matter, and one that came at the end of years of investigation and boxes of evidence. And, it was an independent counsel who really did the bulk of the investigating. And by the time that it came to Congress, a lot of those facts had already been out, there. And so you had a much more bipartisan process. I think what you're seeing Republicans say these days is that, even though these are wrong, what the president did was inappropriate or not the right thing to do. Number one, they don't think it's impeachable. And number two, they believe that this effort to impeach the president started the day he was inaugurated. Mm-hmm. And they'll point to a headline in the Washington Post, which essentially said, the race to inaugurate President Trump is on. Mm-hmm. And so there's just a feeling among quite a few members in the Republican Party that this was political, it was partisan, and it was not motivated for the right reasons.
You know, it's interesting though when you're looking at all these smiling faces, you don't see that acrimonious feeling that we've all talked about. And it was interesting just watching how they are not segregated as they come in by party. That I saw Ted Cruz was flanked by Senator Kamala Harris and Senator Mazie Hirono, who's been one of the biggest critics of the impeachment process in the Senate, all of them walking in together, the three of them smiling and shaking hands with everyone around them.
I think it's important for moments like this. You even saw, obviously, Speaker Pelosi and the Vice President speaking very cordially there. And look, it might, to the viewer, it might seem like an odd thing to point out, a room full of 500 adults acting cordially to each other. But it is important, I think, sometimes.
Is that odd now for us?
It feels odd because we're in this hyper-partisan moment where everything feels like red team, blue team. And it is important, I think, in these moments that we see that our government can function, that people can work together. You know, a lot of these members will tell you, actually, if you challenge them about working across the aisle, they'll point out 5 bills they've co-sponsored with somebody from another party. Amy Klobuchar talks about that on the campaign trail a lot. They'll talk about the work that they do with the most extreme member of the other side of the other party. So they do take a lot of pride in that. It's just that they know that the high-profile issues that raise money and that build support within the institutions and the establishments of the party, you're not rewarded for that bipartisan comedy, and that's the issue.
It's a moment of relief, though, just to see that after, you know, how many weeks now? At least 12 weeks of acrimonious debate, back and forth partisan debate on impeachment, where we've been watching hours and hours of contentious attacks against the president, and this is the opposite.
But remember, in those hours and hours of attacks, the senators weren't saying anything. They had to sit on their bums and be quiet.
Well, and attacks and defense. We've heard both of them. I want to remind our viewers of the significance of the white as Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi now calls the dual chambers into order.
New York, Mr. Jeffries, the gentlewoman from Massachusetts, Ms. Clark, the gentlewoman from Illinois, Mrs. Bustos, the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Chu, the gentlewoman from Kansas, Ms. Davids, the gentlewoman from New Mexico, Ms. Holland, the gentleman from California, Mr. McCarthy, the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise, the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney, the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Emmer, the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Walker, the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Smith, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Brady, the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Cole.
The President of the Senate, at the direction of that body, appoints the following senators as members of the committee on the part of the Senate to escort the President of the United States in the House chamber. The senator from Kentucky, Mr. McConnell. The senator from South Dakota, Mr. Thune. The senator from Iowa, Mr. Grassley. The senator from Wyoming, Mr. Barrasso. The senator from Iowa, Ms. Ernst. The senator from Missouri, Mr. Blunt. The senator from Indiana, Mr. Young. The senator from New York, Mr. Schumer. The senator from Illinois, Mr. Durbin. The senator from Wisconsin, Ms. Baldwin. The senator from Maryland, Mr. Cardin. The senator from New Hampshire, Mrs. Shaheen. And the senator from Delaware, Mr. Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The members of the escort committees will exit the chamber through the Speaker's lobby doors.
So, Molly, you were just telling me who that roll call, that list of names that we heard right now. What is the significance of those electeds?
Well, tonight is all about pomp and circumstance, Lana.
Yeah.
It's all pomp and it's all circumstance, and they are part of the circumstance, I suppose. And what it is it's essentially each body gets to have their leaders, and we were discussing leadership. Members of the leadership team, you escort the president into the chamber. I believe he comes in first, and then they follow, shaking everybody's hands again, going down the aisle. But what's interesting about this group is that one of the individuals who will be on the escort committee, so to speak, is Hakeem Jeffries, who we have seen talk about acrimonious over this past few weeks in front of the Senate arguing the case for impeaching the president. So like I was saying off camera, I kind of wouldn't mind being a fly on the wall that they are in.
Something else I'm curious to see is, we obviously always have the president's cabinet. We have one member of the cabinet that's held back as the designated person, who sits back because we don't want to have the cabinet all in one place at one time. So that's always the trivia I look for. That's the civics nerd in me coming out.
They just showed Mick Mulvaney.
Maybe Mick Carson.
And we do understand right now that the president has just arrived at the Capitol. So in just a little bit, we will hear the announcement of the president of the United States.
Or they.
That was the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps that just arrived into the chambers. We're going to see the pageantry.
Exactly. Then the Supreme Court will come in, so they all walk down the aisle.
Very straight-faced.
Well, one would hope.
This is also the first time in a bit that we've actually seen Speaker Pelosi. The beginning of the impeachment trial in the Senate, she was overseas attending some business, and she really took a purposeful back seat to those House impeachment managers and to the Senate leadership during that time. And it's interesting because she was such a ubiquitous voice that we expected to hear from and see every day in the months leading up to that. And she kind of went away for a month.
And that was calculated. But don't make no mistake about it. She was talking to Adam Schiff on a daily, if not twice a day basis, coordinating the message of the day when he was giving it, when he was making his arguments in front of the Senate, and really she was in touch with what message that was going to be conveyed that day. But I think what's almost even more striking, this is the first time I've seen Nancy Pelosi with Mike Pence in a long time. And
I thought you were going to say this is the first time we've seen Mike Pence, full stop.
Well, there's that too.
Because we hadn't seen him in quite a while. His name has certainly been circulated during all of this impeachment.
That's right, but it's always interesting when C-SPAN or cut or whoever the pool camera is cuts to that shot of the Speaker of the House of one party and the Vice President of another party. It always looks like it's an awkward conversation. And keep in mind, the Vice President arrives. He arrives pretty early because he's technically the president of the Senate, which is why Mike Pence was the one who announced the names of the senators who would be on the quote-unquote escort committee. Yeah. So they've been sitting up there while all these people have been coming on, and I just get a kick out of watching them try to interact. Because when Nancy Pelosi doesn't like an individual, I've noticed that she's not subtle about it. Mm-hmm. It is not subtle.
You don't say.
I'm going to go out on a limb and just say it.
Yeah, this is such a grand occasion, though. Again, as a former staffer, these are the moments when you're kind of taking political science in college and you're thinking about a career in government service. You think about this. It's this imagery. It's the committee hearings. Yep. It's not the bickering and the back and forth, which we've become accustomed to, but it's these kind of moments that really stand out. It's what stands out for me in terms of the moments of my career that I had to experience like this. And you'd like to think that there are a lot of young people who are looking at this and saying, oh, this is what it is. This is what government service and being elected office, this is what it can be in America.
Well, that's true. I mean, covering Capitol Hill and attending a number of these, because all the personalities, who, sometimes it's hard to keep track of 435 members, but as a former page, we had to know everybody's faces. So it's something you just kind of is ingrained. And I just love seeing which faces are talking to which faces because sort of like the different degrees of partisanship.
All right, let's go ahead and listen in.
Madam Speaker, the Chief Justice and Associate Justices of the Supreme Court.
So the president is there at the Capitol now. The person that we've been seeing announcing the Chief Justice is the Diplomatic Corps. That's Kathleen Joyce. She's the Assistant Sergeant at Arms. Of course, the person we'll be also watching for is Paul Irving. He's the House Sergeant at Arms, and we know him from that booming voice where he announces the President of the United States.
That's right. These Sergeant at Arms, they take great pride in this moment. This is the President of the United States. This is something that prior Sergeant at Arms, I mean, they practice it. I mean, you know. You got to make sure you get it right.
I thought it was striking, though, watching Chief Justice John Roberts walk into the chamber knowing that tomorrow the impeachment trial and the vote takes place, that trial over which he will preside. Certainly just a unique moment in
He's got his steps in between the Supreme Court and that walk across the street to the Capitol.
A little tunnel underneath.
We were talking off air a bit about whether or not the 2020s would be there. It looks like Bernie Sanders, who's actually one of the Democrats who will be delivering a response tonight, is in New Hampshire.
Right.
So he's not there, and I bet you the other 2020s aren't there. Of course, they will be back tomorrow for that impeachment vote. But, you know, that would have made for some interesting imagery and pageantry. I'm sure the president would have referred to some of the campaign themes that we've heard beaten into the ground as well.
We expect to see any moment now First Lady Melania Trump being escorted into the executive gallery. Speaking of 2020, there is one of those former 2020 contenders. Actually, is she speaking? I think she's speaking with Senator Kristen Gillibrand. So two former contenders who have now dropped out of the quest for the Democratic nomination.
There's a number of those boys, girls and boys in there, isn't there? I mean, quite a few of them, senators and House members who are running for office. I have a feeling we may see a few cutaways to their their faces. Oh, see, there you go. Oh, actually, no, that's Joaquin, Julian's brother.
I wonder if, Molly, you could just very briefly, while we wait for the First Lady to arrive, touch on how fundamentally, though, in many ways, both the House and the Senate have changed over the course of the Trump administration with respect to not only how they work with each other, the House and the Senate, but within each of those chambers, because there's, from what I understand, in the Senate especially, such a different sense of comedy compared to comedy, C-O-M-I-T-Y, compared to what had existed in the past, whereas you may have had senators from different parties who were able to kind of forge friendships in a way that perhaps isn't quite possible now.
Well, I think it's a number of factors. And Joel, I know you're going to want to weigh into this because, of course, a former Senate staffer. But what I've noticed is the more House members that run for the Senate and become senators, the more you see a breakdown of that comedy, because prior to, I'd say maybe the late 90s, really, a lot of senators had been former governors, or they had been executives in their states. They had played more prominent roles on a state level or even at a party level, and not so much necessarily as House members, because the House is an entirely different beast.
Right.
The House is so large that they have to have a rules committee to enforce the rules, and they stick to it. Whereas in the Senate, there are no rules. There are no rules if everybody agrees.
And there, of course, is the First Lady entering up into the gallery there to applause.
Let's listen in.
There's Tiffany.
Isn't it wild?
She's there with her family. We saw various members of the family, of the first family there.
Yeah, just to pick up on Molly's point really quickly, as I know the president will be joining soon, the Senate has changed so much. It's in part because those House members are running, but it's also because the president has really radicalized his Republican Party in the Senate. Where Jeff Flake used to sit, it's Martha McSally. Where Bob Corker used to sit, it's Marsha Blackburn. These are Trumpers. These are more extreme members of the Republican Party, and you could say the same on the Democratic Party as well.
And we just realized that the face that we recognized next to the First Lady was Rush Limbaugh, who has just been diagnosed.
The President's Cabinet.
We're listening in as we see the president's cabinet entering to applause.
When you talk about Rush Limbaugh, obviously he was diagnosed with lung cancer recently, and there was reporting that the president plans to award him with a Presidential Medal of Freedom. I imagine he may use the moment tonight to announce that or talk a little bit more about that as well. Certainly that will be a polarizing decision, but I don't think it is polarizing to wish anybody Godspeed and good health from a diagnosis like that.
Well, but
All right, thank you very much for watching. We are going to turn it over to CBS Evening News anchor Norah O'Donnell for special coverage.
We'll be back in 2 hours with a complete wrap-up. You're streaming CBSN.
Special report. President Donald J. Trump's State of the Union address.
Good evening. I'm Norah O'Donnell in Washington. President Trump is about to deliver his third State of the Union address at a critical time in his presidency. I want to show you these live pictures now of the House chamber. The president expected to arrive there shortly in the chamber. His theme for the night, the Great American Comeback. And in one excerpt just released a short time ago, he says, in 3 short years, we have shattered the mentality of American decline, and we have rejected the downsizing of America's destiny. The White House says we can expect relentless optimism in his address tonight. Mr. Trump can point to a strong economy, a booming stock market, and new trade deals. He just scored his highest approval rating since taking office. You can see First Lady Melania Trump has already arrived, and they're the Vice President and the Speaker of the House. I mentioned his approval ratings. A new Gallup poll out today shows the president's approval at 49%. Also worth noting that the president was impeached in this very chamber just 48 days ago. One of the questions tonight, will he mention impeachment as he stares into the faces of many of the Democrats who voted to impeach him? Many Republicans have advised him to avoid it. His press office says the word impeachment is not in the speech as planned. I mentioned seating behind the president, you'll see not only Vice President Mike Pence, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who was the one who announced that formal impeachment inquiry in September, and of course the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and Donald Trump have not spoken since October of last year, a bitter feud between the two of them. This also comes at a momentous time, the president facing an historic vote in the Senate on whether to remove him from office. Want to bring in all those joining us here as we cover the president's State of the Union. John Dickerson is with us, our senior political analyst and 60 Minutes correspondent, and Margaret Brennan is a CBS News senior foreign affairs correspondent and the moderator of Face the Nation. Welcome to you both. And the president, even on the eve of his impeachment, John, feeling strong, not only because of the economy, but he feels like those poll numbers show strength.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, you know, even George W. Bush, who was a traditional president, used to say when he would look into the audience and see his political opponents, he would sometimes lean into them. And for the president tonight, it's going to be awfully difficult to resist that inclination.
Madam Speaker, the President of the United States.
And the president now begins not a long walk, but it becomes an extended walk with the shaking of many hands there. Many members who gather along. You might be able to see there in that last shot that we just showed you, the First Lady of the United States, Melania Trump. There are guests in the president's box there, in the First Lady's box, and one of them is Rush Limbaugh, who just revealed this week that he is suffering from lung cancer. Of course, tens of millions of listeners every day, and and we've learned that the president plans to award him a Presidential Medal of Freedom. Margaret?
Indeed, and he's a divisive person for many, but has a huge following, and that is something that the president does respect. I think tonight it is interesting to watch the president walk through. He said this would be low-key. We never know President Trump to be low-key, but it seems he is trying to underscore that he's not the walking wounded. He survived the most powerful tool that Congress could have launched at him for his removal, and we expect, as you were describing there, tomorrow to be a vote to acquit him.
And this moment here, speaking with the Chief Justice who had to preside over that impeachment trial in the United States Senate. I want to bring in Nancy Cordes, who covers Capitol Hill for us. And quite a moment for this president as he is expected to speak about his accomplishments these 3 years in office.
Absolutely, Nora, because as he does that, he will be speaking to a room filled with House Democrats who voted to impeach him just a month and a half ago, and dozens of Senate Democrats and Republicans who spent the day today announcing on the Senate floor how they will vote on his acquittal or removal. So the timing here could be better. On the other hand, the president does give this speech with the certainty that he will be acquitted tomorrow. It would take a 2/3 vote to remove him. And at this point, it looks like it's going to be a vote that comes down largely on party lines.
And Nancy, you see the Speaker of the House just tried to shake the president's hand and he refused or perhaps did not see her hand. As I mentioned, there's a lot of tension between the two of them.
And he did not extend his to her
in that moment.
In this ceremonial moment.
We should note Nancy Pelosi wearing that white jacket, and you'll see a number of the female Democratic House members also wearing white as they mark the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote, a key timeline this year for marking women's suffrage.
Members of Congress, the President of the United States.
And a standing ovation for the President of the United States. It looks like
they're saying 4 more years.
And this is in many ways for the president the official primetime launch of his reelection bid. And you're hearing that 4 more years from those Republican supporters who really went to bat for him.
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, Mr. Vice President, members of Congress, the First Lady of the United States. And my fellow citizens, 3 years ago, we launched the Great American Comeback. Tonight, I stand before you to share the incredible results. Jobs are booming, incomes are soaring, poverty is plummeting, crime is falling, confidence is surging, and our country is thriving and highly respected again. America's enemies are on the run. America's fortunes are on the rise, and America's future is blazing bright. The years of economic decay are over. The days of our country being used, taken advantage of, and even scorned by other nations are long behind us. Gone too are the broken promises, jobless recoveries, tired platitudes, and constant excuses for the depletion of American wealth, power, and prestige. In just 3 short years, we have shattered the mentality of American decline, and we have rejected the downsizing of Americans' destiny. We have totally rejected the downsizing. We're moving forward at a pace that was unimaginable just a short time ago, and we are never, ever going back. I am thrilled to report to you tonight that our economy is the best it has ever been. Our military is completely rebuilt, with its power being unmatched anywhere in the world, and it's not even close. Our borders are secure. Our families are flourishing. Our values are renewed. Our pride is restored. And for all of these reasons, I say to the people of our great country, and to the members of Congress, the state of our union is stronger than ever before. The vision I will lay out this evening demonstrates how we are building the world's most prosperous and inclusive society, one where every citizen can join in America's unparalleled success, and where every community can take part in America's extraordinary rise. From the instant I took office, I moved rapidly to revive the U.S. economy, slashing a record number of job-killing regulations, enacting historic and record-setting tax cuts, and fighting for fair and reciprocal trade agreements. Our agenda is relentlessly pro-worker, pro-family, pro-growth, and most of all, pro-American. Thank you. We are advancing with unbridled optimism and lifting our citizens of every race, color, religion, and creed very, very high. Since my election, we have created 7 million new jobs, 5 million more than government experts projected during the previous administration. The unemployment rate is the lowest in over half a century. And very incredibly, the average unemployment rate under my administration is lower than any administration in the history of our country. If we hadn't reversed the failed economic policies of the previous administration, the world would not now be witnessing this great economic success. The unemployment rate for African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Asian Americans has reached the lowest levels in history. African American youth unemployment has reached an all-time low. African American poverty has declined to the lowest rate ever recorded. The unemployment rate for women reached the lowest level in almost 70 years, and last year women filled 72% of all new jobs added. The veterans' unemployment rate dropped to a record low. The unemployment rate for disabled Americans has reached an all-time low. Workers without a high school diploma have achieved the lowest unemployment rate recorded in U.S. history. A record number of young Americans are now employed. Under the last administration, more than 10 million people were added to the food stamp rolls. Under my administration, 7 million Americans have come off food stamps, and 10 million people have been lifted off of welfare. In 8 years under the last administration, over 300,000 working-age people dropped out of the workforce. In just 3 years of my administration, 3.5 million people, working-age people, have joined the workforce. Since my election, the net worth of the bottom half of wage earners has increased by 47%, 3 times faster than the increase for the top 1%. After decades of flat and falling incomes, wages are rising fast, and wonderfully, they are rising fastest for low-income workers who have seen a 16% pay increase since my election. This is a blue-collar boom. Real median household income is now at the highest level ever recorded. Since my election, U.S. stock markets have soared 70%, adding more than $12 trillion to our nation's wealth, transcending anything anyone believed was possible. This is a record. It is something that every country in the world is looking up to. They admire. Consumer confidence has just reached amazing new highs. All of those millions of people with 401ks and pensions are doing far better than they have ever done before, with increases of 60, 70, 80, 90, and 100% and even more. Jobs and investments are pouring into 9,000 previously neglected neighborhoods. thanks to Opportunity Zones, a plan spearheaded by Senator Tim Scott as part of our great Republican tax cuts. In other words, wealthy people and companies are pouring money into poor neighborhoods or areas that haven't seen investment in many decades, creating jobs, energy, and excitement. This is the first time that these deserving communities have seen anything like this. It's all working. Opportunity Zones are helping Americans like Army veteran Tony Rankins from Cincinnati, Ohio. After struggling with drug addiction, Tony lost his job, his house, and his family. He was homeless. But then Tony found a construction company that invests in Opportunity Zones. He is now a top tradesman, drug-free, reunited with his family, and he is here tonight. Tony, keep up the great work, Tony. Thank you, Tony. Our roaring economy has, for the first time ever, given many former prisoners the ability to get a great job and a fresh start. This second chance at life is made possible because we passed landmark criminal justice reform into law. Everybody said that criminal justice reform couldn't be done, but I got it done, and the people in this room got it done. Thanks to our bold regulatory reduction campaign, the United States has become the #1 producer of oil and natural gas anywhere in the world, by far. With the tremendous progress we have made over the past 3 years, America is now energy independent, and energy jobs, like so many other elements of our country, are at a record high. We are doing numbers that no one would have thought possible just 3 years ago. Likewise, we are restoring our nation's manufacturing might, even though predictions were, as you all know, that this could never, ever be done. After losing 60,000 factories under the previous 2 administrations, America has now gained 12,000 new factories under my administration, with thousands upon thousands of plants and factories being planned or being built. Companies are not leaving. They are coming back to the USA. The fact is that everybody wants to be where the action is, and the United States of America is indeed the place where the action is. One of the biggest promises I made to the American people was to replace the disastrous NAFTA trade deal. In fact, unfair trade is perhaps the single biggest reason that I decided to run for president. Following NAFTA's adoption, our nation lost 1 in 4 manufacturing jobs. Many politicians came and went, pledging to change or replace NAFTA, only to do so, and then absolutely nothing happened. But unlike so many who came before me, I keep my promises. We did our job. Six days ago, I replaced NAFTA and signed the brand new U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement into law. The USMCA will create nearly 100,000 new high-paying American auto jobs and massively boost exports for our farmers, ranchers, and factory workers. It will also bring trade with Mexico and Canada to a much higher level, but also to be a much greater degree of fairness and reciprocity. We will have that fairness and reciprocity, and I say that finally because it's been many, many years that we were treated fairly on trade. This is the first major trade deal in many years to earn the strong backing of America's labor unions. I also promised our citizens that I would impose tariffs to confront China's massive theft of America's jobs. Our strategy has worked. Days ago, we signed the groundbreaking new agreement with China that will defend our workers, protect our intellectual property, bring billions and billions of dollars into our treasury, and open vast new markets for products made and grown right here in the USA. For decades, China has taken advantage of the United States. Now we have changed that. But at the same time, we have perhaps the best relationship we've ever had with China, including with President Xi. They respect what we've done because, quite frankly, they could never really believe that they were able to get away with what they were doing year after year, decade after decade, without someone in our country stepping up and saying, "That's enough." Now we want to rebuild our country, and that's exactly what we're doing. We are rebuilding our country. As we restore American leadership throughout the world, we are once again standing up for freedom in our hemisphere. That's why my administration reversed the failing policies of the previous administration on Cuba. We are supporting the hopes of Cubans, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans to restore democracy. The United States is leading a 59-nation diplomatic coalition against the socialist dictator of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro. Maduro is an illegitimate ruler, a tyrant who brutalizes his people, but Maduro's grip on tyranny will be smashed and broken. Here this evening is a very brave man who carries with him the hopes, dreams, and aspirations of all Venezuelans. Joining us in the gallery is the true and legitimate president of Venezuela, Juan Guaido. Mr. President, please take this message back to your homeland. Thank you, Mr. President. Great honor. Thank you very much. Please take this message back that all Americans are united with the Venezuelan people in their righteous struggle for freedom. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you very much. Socialism destroys nations, but always remember freedom unifies the soul. To safeguard American liberty, we have invested a record-breaking $2.2 trillion in the United States military. We have purchased the finest planes, missiles, rockets, ships, and every other form of military equipment, and it's all made right here in the USA. We are also getting our allies, finally, to help pay their fair share. I have raised contributions from other NATO members by more than $400 billion, and the number of allies meeting their minimum obligations has more than doubled. And just weeks ago, for the first time since President Truman established the Air Force, more than 70 years earlier, we created a brand new branch of the United States Armed Forces. It's called the Space Force. Very important. In the gallery tonight, we have a young gentleman, and what he wants so badly, 13 years old, Ian Lawnfay. He's an 8th grader from Arizona. Ian, please stand up. Ian has always dreamed of going to space. He was the first in his class and among the youngest at an aviation academy. He aspires to go to the Air Force Academy, and then he has his eye on the Space Force. As Ian says, most people look up at space. I want to look down on the world. But sitting behind Ian tonight is his greatest hero of them all. Charles McGee was born in Cleveland, Ohio, 1 century ago. Charles is one of the last surviving Tuskegee Airmen, the first black fighter pilots, and he also happens to be Ian's great-grandfather. Incredible story. After more than 130 combat missions in World War II, he came back home to a country still struggling for civil rights and went on to serve America in Korea and Vietnam. On December 7th, Charles celebrated his 100th birthday. few weeks ago, I signed a bill promoting Charles McGee to Brigadier General, and earlier today, I pinned the stars on his shoulders in the Oval Office. General McGee, our nation salutes you. Thank you, sir. From the Pilgrims to the founders, from the soldiers at Valley Forge to the marchers at Selma, and from President Lincoln to the Reverend Martin Luther King, Americans have always rejected limits on our children's future. Members of Congress, we must never forget that the only victories that matter in Washington are victories that deliver for the American people. The people are the heart of our country. Their dreams are the soul of our country, and their love is what powers and sustains our country. We must always remember that our job is to put America first. The next step forward in building an inclusive society is making sure that every young American gets a great education and the opportunity to achieve the American dream. Yet for too long, countless American children have been trapped in failing government schools. To rescue these students, 18 states have created school choice in the form of opportunity scholarships. The programs are so popular that tens of thousands of students remain on a waiting list. One of those students is Janiyah Davis, a fourth grader from Philadelphia. Janiyah. Janiyah's mom, Stephanie, is a single parent. She would do anything to give her daughter a better future. But last year, that future was put further out of reach when Pennsylvania's governor vetoed legislation to expand school choice to 50,000 children. Janiyah and Stephanie are in the gallery. Stephanie, thank you so much for being here with your beautiful daughter. Thank you very much. But Janiyah, I have some good news for you, because I am pleased to inform you that your long wait is over. I can proudly announce tonight that an opportunity scholarship has become available. It's going to you, and you will soon be heading to the school of your choice. Now I call on Congress to give 1 million American children the same opportunity Janiyah has just received. Pass the Education Freedom Scholarships and Opportunities Act, because no parent should be forced to send their child to a failing government school. Every young person should have a safe and secure environment in which to learn and to grow. For this reason, Our magnificent First Lady has launched the Be Best initiative to advance a safe, healthy, supportive, and drug-free life for the next generation, online, in school, and in our communities. Thank you, Melania, for your extraordinary love and profound care for America's children. Thank you very much. My administration is determined to give our citizens the opportunities they need, regardless of age or background. Through our pledge to American workers, over 400 companies will also provide new jobs and education opportunities to almost 15 million Americans. My budget also contains an exciting vision for our nation's high schools. Tonight, I ask Congress to support our students and back my plan to offer vocational and technical education in every single high school in America. To expand equal opportunity, I am also proud that we achieved record and permanent funding for our nation's historically black colleges and universities. A good life for American families also requires the most affordable, innovative, and high-quality health care system on earth. Before I took office, health insurance premiums had more than doubled in just 5 years. I moved quickly to provide affordable alternatives. Our new plans are up to 60% less expensive and better. I've also made an ironclad pledge to American families. We will always protect patients with pre-existing conditions. And we will always protect your Medicare, and we will always protect your Social Security, always. The American patient should never be blindsided by medical bills. That is why I signed an executive order requiring price transparency. Many experts believe that transparency, which will go into full effect at the beginning of next year, will be even bigger than health care reform. It will save families massive amounts of money for substantially better care. But as we work to improve Americans' health care, there are those who want to take away your health care, take away your doctor, and abolish private insurance entirely. 132 lawmakers in this room have endorsed legislation to impose a socialist takeover of our health care system, wiping out the private health insurance plans of 180 million very happy Americans. To those watching at home tonight, I want you to know we will never let socialism destroy American health care. Over 130 legislators in this chamber have endorsed legislation that would bankrupt our nation by providing free taxpayer-funded health care to millions of illegal aliens, forcing taxpayers to subsidize free care for anyone in the world who unlawfully crosses our borders. These proposals would raid the Medicare benefits of our seniors and that our seniors depend on, while acting as a powerful lure for illegal immigration. That is what is happening in California and other states. Their systems are totally out of control, costing taxpayers vast and unaffordable amounts of money. If forcing American taxpayers to provide unlimited free health care to illegal aliens sounds fair to you, then stand with the radical left. But if you believe that we should defend American patients and American seniors, then stand with me and pass legislation to prohibit free government health care for illegal aliens. This will be a tremendous boon to our already very strongly guarded southern border, where, as we speak, a long, tall, and very powerful wall is being built. We have now completed over 100 miles and have over 500 miles fully completed in a very short period of time. Early next year, we will have substantially more than 500 miles completed. My administration is also taking on the big pharmaceutical companies. We have approved a record number of affordable generic drugs, and medicines are being approved by the FDA at a faster clip than ever before. And I was pleased to announce last year that for the first time in 51 years, the cost of prescription drugs actually went down. And working together, Congress can reduce drug prices substantially from current levels. I've been speaking to Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa and others in Congress in order to get something on drug pricing done, and done quickly and properly. I'm calling for bipartisan legislation that achieves the goal of dramatically lowering prescription drug prices. Get a bill on my desk and I will sign it into law immediately. With unyielding commitment, we are curbing the opioid epidemic. Drug overdose deaths declined for the first time in nearly 30 years. Among the states hardest hit, Ohio is down 22%, Pennsylvania is down 18%, Wisconsin is down 10%, and we will not quit until we have beaten the opioid epidemic once and for all. Protecting Americans' health also means fighting infectious diseases. We are coordinating with the Chinese government and working closely together on the coronavirus outbreak in China. My administration will take all necessary steps to safeguard our citizens from this threat. We have launched ambitious new initiatives to substantially improve care for Americans with kidney disease, Alzheimer's, and those struggling with mental health. And because Congress was so good as to fund my request, new cures for childhood cancer, and we will eradicate the AIDS epidemic in America by the end of this decade. Almost every American family knows the pain when a loved one is diagnosed with a serious illness. Here tonight is a special man, beloved by millions of Americans, who just received a stage 4 advanced cancer diagnosis. This is not good news, but what is good news is that he is the greatest fighter and winner that you will ever meet. Rush Limbaugh, thank you for your decades of tireless devotion to our country. And Rush, in recognition of all that you have done for our nation, the millions of people a day that you speak to and that you inspire, and all of the incredible work that you have done for charity, I am proud to announce tonight that you will be receiving our country's highest civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. I will now ask the First Lady of the United States to present you with the honor, please. Rush and Catherine, congratulations. Thank you, Catherine. As we pray for all who are sick, we know that America is constantly achieving new medical breakthroughs. In 2017, doctors at St. Luke's Hospital in Kansas City delivered one of the earliest premature babies ever to survive. Born at just 21 weeks and 6 days and weighing less than a pound, Ellie Schneider was a born fighter. Through the skill of her doctors and the prayers of her parents, little Ellie kept on winning the battle of life. Today, Ellie is a strong, healthy 2-year-old girl sitting with her amazing mother, Robin. In the gallery, Ellie and Robin, we are glad to have you with us tonight. Ellie reminds us that every child is a miracle of life. And thanks to modern medical wonders, 50% of very premature babies delivered at the hospital where Ellie was born now survive. It's an incredible thing. Thank you very much. Our goal should be to ensure that every baby has the best chance to thrive and grow just like Ellie. That is why I'm asking Congress to provide an additional $50 million to fund neonatal research for America's youngest patients. That is why I'm also calling upon members of Congress here tonight to pass legislation finally banning the late-term abortion of babies. Whether we are Republican, Democrat, or Independent, surely we must all agree that every human life is a sacred gift from God. As we support America's moms and dads, I was recently proud to sign the law providing new parents in the federal workforce paid family leave, serving as a model for the rest of the country. Now I call on Congress to pass the bipartisan Advancing Support for Working Families Act, extending family leave to mothers and fathers all across our nation. $40 million American families have an average $2,200 extra thanks to our child tax credit. I've also overseen historic funding increases for high-quality child care, enabling 17 states to help more children, many of which have reduced or eliminated their wait lists altogether. And I sent Congress a plan with a vision to further expand access to high-quality child care and urge you to act immediately. To protect the environment, days ago, I announced that the United States will join the 1 Trillion Trees Initiative, an ambitious effort to bring together government and private sector to plant new trees in America and all around the world. We must also rebuild America's infrastructure. I ask you to pass Senator John Barrasso's highway bill to invest in new roads, bridges, and tunnels all across our land. I'm also committed to ensuring that every citizen can have access to high-speed internet, including and especially in rural America. A better tomorrow for all Americans also requires us to keep America safe. That means supporting the men and women of law enforcement at every level, including our nation's heroic ICE officers. Last year, our brave ICE officers arrested more than 120,000 criminal aliens charged with nearly 10,000 burglaries, 5,000 sexual assaults, 45,000 violent assaults, and 2,000 murders. Tragically, there are many cities in America where radical politicians have chosen to provide sanctuary for these criminal, illegal aliens. In sanctuary cities, local officials order police to release dangerous criminal aliens to prey upon the public instead of handing them over to ICE to be safely removed. Just 29 days ago, a criminal alien freed by the sanctuary city of New York was charged with the brutal rape and murder of a 92-year-old woman. The killer had been previously arrested for assault, but under New York sanctuary policies, he was set free. If the city had honored ICE's detainer request, his victim would still be alive today. The state of California passed an outrageous law declaring their whole state to be a sanctuary for criminal, illegal immigrants, a very terrible sanctuary with catastrophic results. Here is just one tragic example. In December 2018, California police detained an illegal alien with 5 prior arrests, including convictions for robbery and assault. But as required by California's sanctuary law, local authorities released him. Days later, the criminal alien went on a gruesome spree of deadly violence. He viciously shot one man going about his daily work. He approached a woman sitting in her car and shot her in the arm and in the chest. He walked into a convenience store and wildly fired his weapon. He hijacked a truck and smashed into vehicles, critically injuring innocent victims. One of the victims is a terrible, terrible situation. Died, 51-year-old American named Rocky Jones. Rocky was at a gas station when this vile criminal fired 8 bullets at him from close range, murdering him in cold blood. Rocky left behind a devoted family, including his brothers, who loved him more than anything else in the world. One of his grieving brothers is here with us tonight. Jody, would you please stand? Jody, thank you. Jody, our hearts weep for your loss, and we will not rest until you have justice. Senator Tom Tillis has introduced legislation to allow Americans like Jody to sue sanctuary cities and states when a loved one is hurt or killed as a result of these deadly practices. I ask Congress to pass the Justice for Victims of Sanctuary Cities Act immediately. The United States of America should be a sanctuary for law-abiding Americans, not criminal aliens. In the last 3 years, ICE has arrested over 5,000 wicked human traffickers, and I have signed 9 pieces of legislation to stamp out the menace of human trafficking domestically and all around the globe. My administration has undertaken an unprecedented effort to secure the southern border of the United States. Before I came into office, if you showed up illegally on our southern border and were arrested, you were simply released and allowed into our country, never to be seen again. My administration has ended catch and release. If you come illegally, you will now be promptly removed from our country. Very importantly, we entered into historic cooperation agreements with the governments of Mexico, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. As a result of our unprecedented efforts, illegal crossings are down 75% since May. dropping 8 straight months in a row. And as the wall rapidly goes up, drug seizures rise, and the border crossings are going down and going down very rapidly. Last year, I traveled to the border in Texas and met Chief Patrol Agent Raul Ortiz. Over the last 24 months, Agent Ortiz and his team have seized more than 200,000 pounds of poisonous narcotics, arrested more than 3,000 human smugglers, and rescued more than 2,000 migrants. Days ago, Agent Ortiz was promoted to Deputy Chief of Border Patrol, and he joins us tonight. Chief Ortiz, please stand. A grateful nation thanks you and all of the heroes of Border Patrol and ICE. Thank you very much. Thank you. To build on these historic gains, we are working on legislation to replace our outdated and randomized immigration system with one based on merit, welcoming those who follow the rules, contribute to our economy, support themselves financially, and uphold our values. With every action, my administration is restoring the rule of law and reasserting the culture of American freedom. Working with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, thank you, Mitch, and his colleagues in the Senate, we have confirmed a record number of 187 new federal judges to uphold our Constitution as written. This includes 2 brilliant new Supreme Court justices, Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh. Thank you. And we have many in the pipeline. My administration is also defending religious liberty, and that includes the constitutional right to pray in public schools. In America, we don't punish prayer. We don't tear down crosses. We don't ban symbols of faith. We don't muzzle preachers and pastors. In America, we celebrate faith. We cherish religion. We lift our voices in prayer, and we raise our sights to the glory of God. Just as we believe in the First Amendment, we also believe in another constitutional right that is under siege all across our country. So long as I am president, I will always protect your Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. In reaffirming our heritage as a free nation, we must remember that America has always been a frontier nation. Now we must embrace the next frontier, America's manifest destiny in the stars. I am asking Congress to fully fund the Artemis program to ensure that the next man and the first woman on the moon will be American astronauts, using this as a launching pad to ensure that America is the first nation to plant its flag on Mars. My administration is also strongly defending our national security and combating radical Islamic terrorism. Last week, I announced a groundbreaking plan for peace between Israel and the Palestinians. Recognizing that all past attempts have failed, we must be determined and creative in order to stabilize the region and give millions of young people the chance to realize a better future. 3 years ago, the barbarians of ISIS held over 20,000 square miles of territory in Iraq and Syria. Today, the ISIS territorial caliphate has been 100% destroyed, and the founder and leader of ISIS, the bloodthirsty killer known as al-Baghdadi, is dead. We are joined this evening by Carl and Marcia Mueller. After graduating from college, their beautiful daughter, Carla, became a humanitarian aid worker. She once wrote, "Some people find God in church, some people find God in nature, some people find God in love. I find God in suffering. I've known for some time what my life's work is, using my hands as tools to relieve suffering." In 2013, while caring for suffering civilians in Syria, Kayla was kidnapped, tortured, and enslaved by ISIS and kept as a prisoner of al-Baghdadi himself. After more than 500 horrifying days of captivity, al-Baghdadi murdered young, beautiful Kayla. She was just 26 years old. On the night that U.S. Special Forces operations ended al-Baghdadi's miserable life, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, received a call in the Situation Room. He was told that the brave men of the elite Special Forces team that so perfectly carried out the operation had given their mission a name, Task Force 814. It was a reference to a special day, August 14th, Kayla's birthday. Carl and Marcia, America's warriors, never forgot Kayla, and neither will we. Thank you. Every day, America's men and women in uniform demonstrate the infinite depth of love that dwells in the human heart. One of these American heroes was Army Staff Sergeant Christopher Hake. On his second deployment to Iraq in 2008, Sergeant Hake wrote a letter to his one-year-old son, Gage. "I will be with you again," he wrote to Gage. "I will teach you to ride your first bike, build your first sandbox, watch you play sports, and see you have kids also. I love you, son. Take care of your mother. I am always with you, Daddy." On Easter Sunday of 2008, Chris was out on patrol in Baghdad when his Bradley fighting vehicle was hit by a roadside bomb. That night, he made the ultimate sacrifice for our country. Sergeant Hake now rests in eternal glory in Arlington, and his wife, Kelly, is in the gallery tonight, joined by their son, who is now a 13-year-old and doing very, very well. To Kelly and Gage, Chris will live in our hearts forever. He is looking down on you now. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you both very much. The terrorist responsible for killing Sergeant Hake was Qasem Soleimani, who provided the deadly roadside bomb that took Chris's life. Soleimani was the Iranian regime's most ruthless butcher, a monster who murdered or wounded thousands of American service members in Iraq. As the world's top terrorist, Soleimani orchestrated the deaths of countless men, women, and children. He directed the December assault and went on to assault U.S. forces in Iraq, was actively planning new attacks when we hit him very hard. And that's why last month, at my direction, the U.S. military executed a flawless precision strike that killed Soleimani and terminated his evil reign of terror forever. Our message to the terrorists is clear. You will never escape American justice. If you attack our citizens, you forfeit your life. In recent months, we have seen proud Iranians raise their voices against their oppressive rulers. The Iranian regime must abandon its pursuit of nuclear weapons, stop spreading terror, death, and destruction, and start working for the good of its own people. Because of our powerful sanctions, the Iranian economy is doing very, very poorly. We can help them make a very good and short-time recovery. It can all go very quickly, but perhaps they are too proud or too foolish to ask for that help. We are here. Let's see which road they choose. It is totally up to them. As we defend American lives, we are working to end America's wars in the Middle East. In Afghanistan, the determination and valor of our warfighters has allowed us to make tremendous progress, and peace talks are now underway. I am not looking to kill hundreds of thousands of people in Afghanistan, many of them totally innocent. It is also not our function to serve other nations as law enforcement agencies. These are warfighters that we have, the best in the world, and they either want to fight to win or not fight at all. We are working to finally end America's longest war and bring our troops back home. War places a heavy burden on our nation's extraordinary military families, especially spouses like Amy Williams from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and her two children, 6-year-old Eliana and 3-year-old Rowan. Amy works full-time and volunteers countless hours helping other military families. For the past 7 months, she has done it all while her husband, Sergeant First Class Townsend Williams, is in Afghanistan on his 4th deployment in the Middle East. Amy's kids haven't seen their father's face in many months. Amy, your family's sacrifice makes it possible for all of our families to live in safety and in peace, and we want to thank you. Thank you, Amy. But Amy, there is one more thing. Tonight we have a very special surprise. I am thrilled to inform you that your husband is back from deployment. He is here with us tonight, and we couldn't keep him waiting any longer. Welcome home, Sergeant Williams. Thank you very much. As the world bears witness tonight, America is a land of heroes. This is a place where greatness is born, where destinies are forged, and where legends come to life. This is the home of Thomas Edison and Teddy Roosevelt, of many great generals, including Washington, Pershing, Patton, and MacArthur. This is the home of Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, Amelia Earhart, Harriet Tubman, the Wright brothers, Neil Armstrong, and so many more. This is the country where children learn names like Wyatt Earp, Davy Crockett, and Annie Oakley. This is the place where the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth and where Texas patriots made their last stand at the Alamo. The beautiful, beautiful Alamo. The American nation was carved out of the vast frontier by the toughest, strongest, fiercest, and most determined men and women ever to walk on the face of the earth. Our ancestors braved the unknown, tamed the wilderness, settled the Wild West, lifted millions from poverty, disease, and hunger, vanquished tyranny and fascism, ushered the world to new heights of science and medicine, laid down the railroads, dug out the canals, raised up the skyscrapers, and ladies and gentlemen, our ancestors built the most exceptional republic ever to exist in all of human history, and we are making it greater than ever before. This is our glorious and magnificent inheritance. We are Americans. We are pioneers. We are the pathfinders. We settled the new world. We built the modern world. And we changed history forever by embracing the eternal truth that everyone is made equal by the hand of Almighty God. America is the place where anything can happen. America is the place where anyone can rise. And here, on this land, on this soil, on this continent, the most incredible dreams come true. This nation is our canvas, and this country is our masterpiece. We look at tomorrow and see unlimited frontiers just waiting to be explored. Our brightest discoveries are not yet known. Our most thrilling stories are not yet told. Our grandest journeys are not yet made. The American age, the American epic, the American adventure has only just begun. Our spirit is still young. The sun is still rising. God's grace is still shining. And my fellow Americans, the best is yet to come. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America. Thank you very much.
The president promised relentless optimism in his remarks tonight. And upstaged by, in the final moments, by the Speaker of the House, who just ripped up his speech.
It appears she just tore up some papers, and that may be the speech that he handed her when he walked out, and they did not shake hands at the beginning. It was an exclamation point.
The president was inaugurated with a speech about American carnage. Tonight, 3 years later, Before the nation, he spoke about the great American comeback. This was a speech unlike any other I have witnessed from President Donald Trump, where the reality TV president took on the State of the Union. A master showman at his best, including a reunion from an American soldier who had just returned, surprising his wife and 2 young children, granting a scholarship for a young African-American girl who wanted to go to a different school. There were many moments like this where Republicans leapt to their feet, shouting 4 more years, USA, and Democrats sat stone-faced. At many times, the Speaker of the House directly behind the President of the United States, pursing her lips, almost looking ill at some of the remarks made as the President touted his accomplishments and those of his administration, including a strong record on the economy. Want to bring in John Dickerson here and Margaret Brennan. John?
Well, you know, this was his Morning in America speech. That was a phrase that came from Ronald Reagan in 1984. He said, "It's morning in America." But when Reagan did it, when he gave his State of the Union in 1984, in his election year, his second paragraph was about the bipartisan achievements. He said America was in a fix, but it was no one's fault, no party, no generation. This speech, in other words, he embraced the bipartisan kind of spirit usually of this speech. That spirit did not exist in this. Not only did the president not shake the speaker's hand, she did not say the traditional words, "It's my high privilege and distinct honor to introduce the president." We saw there that it was an absolutely split evening. The division in America was out there for all to see. And now, as Margaret was saying earlier, this is the campaign kickoff speech. But the president pulled out every stop and even created some new stops to pull out.
Very much the showman, with giveaways in some ways to some of those who were there to participate. The president's message came back to some of the greatest hits of his last campaign, including that emphasis at the end, that very hard turn on immigration.
All right, the president has now left the House chamber. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with the Democratic response delivered by Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. We'll be right back. Just a moment.
You can watch CBSN 24/7.
We've got an amazing story to share with you.
Let's talk about the latest developments. There's so many levels to this.
We have a CBS News exclusive.
Fires in California. What happens next and how does it all play out?
We are on a mission with NASA.
I understand you have some breaking news. It's not over yet, is the bottom line.
This is a massive operation.
It's quite an adventure here at CBSN.
It's been a day. Wow. That's not normal.
Our nation's capital. Decisions are made here that affect all of us. So join us every evening as we bring you CBS News original reporting from around the world, while keeping our eye on what's going on right here in Washington. Our nation's capital. Decisions are made here that affect all of us. So join us every evening as we bring you CBS News original reporting from around the world, while keeping our eye on what's going on right here in Washington.
Wherever we have to go.
We've just flown along the coastline.
Whatever we have to do.
Tonight, police were throwing the first rounds of tear gas.
Every evening, we are focused.
This is the main highway to the hardest hit areas.
On finding and telling the truth.
How does that hamper or hurt our national security?
Even among the ashes, you can see the signs of deforestation.
And earning your trust.
You traveled the whole way with your son?
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell.
Good morning to you and welcome to CBS This Morning.
Understanding the world.
We're going to begin with breaking news.
Begins with the right questions.
And police discovered a motive. Does the president have a red line here?
What can voters expect to see today?
Join Gayle King, Anthony Mason, and Tony DeCopel on CBS This Morning.
We know a little more this morning. This is a major development.
This is a very serious situation.
More news every morning on the show everyone is talking about.
We have much more news ahead for you.
CBS This Morning.
Understanding the world begins with the right questions.
Do you trust Kim Jong-un?
Doesn't the blame reside with Jewel? Is it?
Back in incredible remarks by the President of the United States talking about a great American comeback. It ended with people on their feet applauding and the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, taking the President's speech and ripping it in half, as if to say it was something she did not approve of, something I've never ever seen during a State of the Union. Now, the opposing party has tapped a rising star to deliver its response to the President's State of the Union address. Gretchen Whitmer is 48. She's in her first term as governor of Michigan. One of her signature campaign promises was to fix the damn roads. And tonight she enters the national spotlight, giving the Democratic response to the President of the United States. And there's a reason they chose the governor from Michigan. This is a state that the president barely won. Let's listen in.
Good evening. I'm honored to be here and grateful that you're tuning in. I'm Gretchen Whitmer, the 49th governor of the great state of Michigan. Tonight, I'm at my daughter Sherry and Sydney's public school, East Lansing High School. We're here today with families and parents, teachers, and most importantly, students. I want to thank you all for coming, but tonight I'm going to talk to those of you who are watching at home. I'd need a lot more than 10 minutes to respond to what the president just said. So instead of talking about what he is saying, I'm going to highlight what Democrats are doing. After all, you can listen to what someone says, but to know the truth, watch what they do. Michiganders are no different from Americans everywhere. We love our families and want a good life today and a better life tomorrow for our kids. We work hard, and we expect our government to work hard for us as well. We have grit and value loyalty, and we still root for the Detroit Lions. We and all Americans might be weary of today's politics, but we must stay engaged. Our country, our democracy, our future demand it. We're capable of great things when we work together. We cannot forget that despite the dishonesty and division of the last few years, and that we heard tonight from the President of the United States, together we have boundless potential. And young Americans are proving that every day by taking action. That's what I want to focus on tonight. Monty Scott is 13 years old and lives in Muskegon Heights, Michigan. Monty Street was covered in potholes. They were ankle deep, and he got tired of waiting for them to get fixed. So he grabbed a shovel and a bucket of dirt and filled them in himself. During my campaign, people told me to fix the damn roads because blown tires and broken windshields are downright dangerous. And car repairs take money from rent, childcare, or groceries. And we, the Democrats, are doing something about it. In Illinois, Governor J.B. Pritzker passed a multi-billion-dollar plan to rebuild their roads and bridges. Governor Phil Murphy is replacing lead pipes in New Jersey. All across the country, Democratic leaders are rebuilding bridges, fixing roads, expanding broadband, and cleaning up drinking water. Everyone in this country benefits when we invest in infrastructure. Congressional Democrats have presented proposals to keep us moving forward, but President Trump and the Republicans in the Senate are blocking the path. When it comes to infrastructure, Monty has tried to do more with a shovel and a pile of dirt than the Republicans in D.C. have with the Oval Office and the U.S. Senate. Bullying people on Twitter doesn't fix bridges. It burns them. Our energy should be used to solve problems. And it's true for healthcare too. For me, for so many Americans, healthcare is personal, not political. When I was 30, I became a member of the sandwich generation. That means I was sandwiched between two generations of my own family for whom I was the primary caregiver. I was holding down a new job, caring for my newborn daughter, as well as my mom at the end of her brain cancer battle. I was up all night with a baby, and during the day, I had to fight my mom's insurance company when they wrongly denied her coverage for chemotherapy. It was hard. It exposed the harsh realities of our workplaces, our healthcare system, and our child care system. And it changed me. I lost patience for people who are just talk and no action. So as a state senator, I worked with a Republican governor and legislature to expand healthcare coverage to more than 680,000 Michiganders under the Affordable Care Act. Today, Democrats from Maine to Montana are expanding coverage and lowering costs. In Kansas, Governor Laura Kelly is working across the aisle to bring Medicaid coverage to tens of thousands. In New Mexico, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham enshrined ACA protections into law. Every Democrat running for president has a plan to expand health care for all Americans. Every one of them has supported the Affordable Care Act with coverage for people with pre-existing conditions. They may have different plans, but the goal is the same. President Trump sadly has a different plan. He's asking the courts to rip those life-saving protections away. It's pretty simple. Democrats are trying to make your health care better. Republicans in Washington are trying to take it away. Think about kids like 17-year-old Blake Carroll from Idaho, who organized a fundraiser to pay for his mom's colon cancer treatment. Or 19-year-old Ebony Myers from Utah, who sells art to help pay for her own rare genetic disorder treatment. No one should have to crowdsource their health care, not in America. But the reality is, not everyone in America has a job with health care and benefits. In fact, many have jobs that don't even pay enough to cover their monthly expenses. It doesn't matter what the president says about the stock market. What matters is that millions of people struggle to get by or don't have enough money at the end of the month after paying for transportation, student loans, or prescription drugs. American workers are hurting. In my own state, our neighbors in Wisconsin and Ohio, Pennsylvania, and all over the country, wages have stagnated while CEO pay has skyrocketed. So when the president says the economy is strong, my question is, strong for whom? Strong for the wealthy who are reaping rewards from tax cuts they don't need? The American economy needs to be a different kind of strong. Strong for the science teacher spending her own money to buy supplies for her classroom. Strong for the single mom picking up extra hours so she can afford her daughter's soccer cleats. Strong for the small business owner who has to make payroll at the end of the month. Michigan invented the middle class, so we know if the economy doesn't work for working people, it just doesn't work. Who fights for hardworking Americans? Democrats do. In the U.S. House, Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Democrats passed a landmark bill on equal pay, another bill to give 30 million Americans a raise by increasing the minimum wage, and groundbreaking legislation to finally give Medicare the power to negotiate lower drug prices for America's seniors and families. Those three bills and more than 275 other bipartisan bills are just gathering dust on Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's desk. Senator McConnell, America needs you to move those bills. Meanwhile, Democrats across the country are getting things done. Pennsylvania's Governor Tom Wolf is expanding the right to overtime pay. Michigan is too. Because if you're on the clock, you deserve to get paid. Nevada Governor Steve Sisolak and North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper are working to give hard-working teachers a raise. And speaking of the classroom, Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers unilaterally increased school funding by $65 million last year. In Colorado, Governor Jared Polis has enacted free all-day kindergarten. And in 29 states, we've helped pass minimum wage hikes into law, which will lift people out of poverty and improve lives for families. That's strength. That's action. Democracy takes action. And that's why I'm so inspired by young people. They respond to mass shootings, demanding policies that make schools safer. They react to a world that's literally on fire, with fire in their bellies, to push leaders to finally take action on climate change. They take on a road filled with potholes with a shovel and some dirt. It's what gives me great confidence in our future. And it's why sometimes it feels like they're the adults in the room. But it shouldn't have to be that way. It's not their mess to clean up. It's ours. The choices we make today create their reality tomorrow. Young people, I'm talking to you and your parents and grandparents. Democrats want safe schools. We want everyone to have a path to a good life, whether it's through a union apprenticeship, a community college, a four-year university, without drowning in debt. We want your water to be clean. We want you to love who you love and to live authentically as your true selves. And we want women to have autonomy over our bodies. We want our country welcoming, and everyone's vote counted. 2020 is a big year. It's the year my daughter Sherry will graduate from high school. It's also the year she'll cast her first ballot, along with millions of young Americans. The two things are connected, because walking across a graduation stage is as important as walking into the voting booth for the first time. Her future, all our kids' futures, will be determined not just by their dreams, but by our actions. As we witness the impeachment process in Washington, there are some things each of us, no matter our party, should demand. The truth matters. Facts matter. And no one should be above the law. It's not what those senators say. Tomorrow, it's about what they do that matters. Remember, listen to what people say, but watch what they do. It's time for action. Generations of Americans are counting on us. Let's not let them down. Thank you for listening. God bless America. Good night.
And the Democratic response from the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, speaking from a school where both of her daughters attend there and talking about the Democratic achievements, leaving you could call it the unofficial response, really, to Nancy Pelosi, who took the president's State of the Union and ripped it up on live television.
The president, throughout his speech, which was, as you pointed out, quite restrained, and particularly restrained for this improvisational president, there was bait in there for Democrats. And some of them in the audience took it, and the speaker at the very last moment took the bait, ripped up, and so the governor there was trying to do what a lot of Democrats have been saying, which is run on what we're running on, run on what we care about and what people out in the country care about. You saw the president's numbers go up during impeachment. The idea for a lot of Democrats is that Washington Democrats are too obsessed with the president. They need to get back to what people care about. That's what the governor was trying to do. We'll see if the ripping up of the speech becomes the moment people remember when they think of the Democratic response.
Margaret and I were up on Capitol Hill earlier today, meeting with Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who was already charged up about making the Democratic rebuttal to the President of the United States and saying the President is going to offer lots of fabulous things in the State of the Union address, but watch for the budget on Monday. Look at the President's record. See what he actually does, which is true in every administration. It's easy to say what you're for, what you're going to give everybody. A budget tells the truth, and certainly what you can get through Congress. But she also said this, Pelosi, she said, the higher the market goes, the more tolerance people have for the pain of others. The suggestion that while the stock market is soaring and there are some people who are making a lot of money, there are many Americans who are left behind.
Right. Well, a slight majority of Americans, it's over 50% of Americans do own stock in some form or the other. Her emphasis is on the working class and saying, yes, you are at these record employment levels, but the wages aren't going up to match the cost of living. And certainly with, there are a few things that resonate with both audiences, Democrat and Republican right now. Infrastructure is one of them. Healthcare costs is the other, specifically on lowering prescription prescription drugs and the cost there. You heard the president talk about it. Speaker Pelosi would love to talk about it, too. But I think that end of everything, that speech and tearing it up, lets us get a pretty easy forecast of the odds of legislation on these things, even the things they do agree about in terms of helping the working class.
No one covers Capitol Hill better than Nancy Cordes, who joins us now and spends every day up there talking to members. The president did not extend his hand to the Speaker of the House in the beginning, and throughout that speech, she seemed extremely agitated and angry with his remarks.
Nora, I think that you're starting to get a pretty good sense of why one of them, either the speaker or the president, seems to walk out of the few meetings that they actually do have with one another. There are a lot of bad feelings at this point. And as she was leaving the chamber, reporters caught up to her and asked her why she ripped up the speech. Here's what she had to say, Nora: because it was the courteous thing to do considering the alternative. So she's making it very clear that she did it, that she meant to do it, that she was trying to send a message, and really things got off to a bad start. Of course, State of the Union addresses are always political. You're always going to have cheering from one side or the other. It would be naive to say that they weren't political. But in this case, it really felt a lot more like a campaign rally than a speech to the nation. You had Republicans right off the top chanting 4 more years. Democrats got angry very early when the president seemed to suggest he had rescued the economy from the depths of the Obama years. They started shouting out their disagreement to that and several other notions that the president put forward. At one point, he said that some people were trying to dismantle health care. They shouted, "You are." At another point, he claimed that he was going to force prescription drug companies to lower costs. Democrats openly started laughing. This, as Republicans seemed to try to cheer loud enough to make up for the lack of cheering on the Democratic side. So really, it turned into something of a circus. And at one point, one member of Congress, Tim Ryan of Ohio, actually tweeted that he was walking out of the State of the Union because he had had enough. He said it's like watching professional wrestling. It's all fake. Really a striking turn of events when you think that just a decade ago, one member of Congress shouting, "You lie," at a speech by President Obama in that same chamber generated days of controversy. And here you had it happen multiple times in one speech, culminating, of course, with the speaker ripping up that speech.
And Nancy, help us understand, because this was one of the questions that we posed to Speaker Pelosi today. If you haven't spoken with the president since October, how can you get any major bipartisan legislation done? Now, they did get USMCA done. The question is, how do you find agreement on infrastructure or prescription drugs when the desire to find compromise is there, but they are wide apart on the details?
They really have stopped trying to find compromise, Nora. Democrats went ahead and passed their own prescription drug bill back in December. They were shouting about that during the speech tonight because they feel that that's one of the areas that they could have worked on with the president, but he sort of left them holding the bag as far as they're concerned. He has talked for years about wanting to work on infrastructure. No deal there as well. In fact, in the middle of last year, he was talking about wanting to work with Democrats on some gun reform measures, and that never went anywhere. He kept saying that the White House was going to come out with a proposal, and it never happened. And tonight he talked about being a staunch supporter of the Second Amendment, but gone was any reference to any kind of gun reform compromise. And so, it's really hard to see where the areas of agreement are in the year ahead. Typically, you'll leave a State of the Union with at least a couple of bullet points, things that the two sides would like to work on together. There was very little of that tonight. And interestingly, if you look back to the State of the Union a year ago, Nora, here's what the president said. If there's going to be peace and legislation, there cannot be war and investigation. Well, Democrats, safe to say, did not heed that warning. They investigated the president all year long. It culminated with impeachment in December, and now a vote on acquittal or removal in the Senate tomorrow. Clearly, the bad feelings between the two sides are running very high at this point.
Nancy.
You know what I'm struck about, Nora, is in 2011, after Gabby Giffords was shot, members of both sides sat together, Republican and Democrat, for the State of the Union as a sign of unity. It was only 9 years ago. And we are now in what is, since 1913, probably the most partisan, when they started giving them in person again, but the presidents did, the most partisan State of the Union. But what's at the center of it is an incumbent president with a very good economy who gave a very restrained speech and used every tool of the job in there. If Democrats want to make an argument to the country, if all the country hears is bickering and unhappiness, that helps an incumbent president with a strong economy. And, by the way, doesn't help anybody who's looking for solutions that Democrats might have. This is a challenge for Democrats to be able to respond to the arguments the president made with their own strengths. Tearing up papers is not one of their strengths.
You know, we've been watching for the past couple of weeks the president's counsel make their case to defend the president from removal from office. And he said, end this era of impeachment was his plea. And the president didn't mention impeachment at all tonight. I want to bring in Ben Tracy from the White House. And what's the explanation behind that? And will we hear more from the president tomorrow when the Senate votes?
Well, yeah, that was the big question here all day from reporters to the White House. Was he going to mention impeachment? And we were told pretty consistently throughout the day, no, that is not in the text. He's not going to mention it. The president seemed to take the tact, instead of dwelling on impeachment, walking into the very chamber where he was impeached 48 days ago and basically weaponizing it. I mean, he sat up there, stood up there, and he was not at all chastened. He was emboldened. And I think he wanted to show everyone in that room that I'm going to be fine after this is done. You're going to have your vote tomorrow, but we all know how that's going to go, and I am ready to run. And Nora, picking up on something you said earlier about the economy and the stock market, that is a message we have heard the president use on the campaign trail consistently. It's one thing he always brings up. He says, how are your 401ks doing? I bet you're happy. The president has even said, you may not like me, you may not like everything I say, but you sure like your 401ks and you like it better than socialism. And that is this contrast he is trying to draw. As it relates to impeachment, the president did not mention it tonight, but we are expecting to hear from him tomorrow here at the White House.
All right, Ben, thank you. And the president, in each of these remarks he made tonight and specific proposals, he was highlighting something that might be appealing to independent voters, to Democratic voters, each of the characters who sat and people that sat in the First Lady's box. They were emotionally compelling stories, great Americans who serve our military for years, who've done great things in terms of medicine. And that was deliberate on the part of the president. And what we just have now, and the reason I set that up is because we have now a tweet from the president of the from the White House that says, Speaker Pelosi just ripped up one of our last surviving Tuskegee airmen, the survival of a child born at 21 weeks, the mourning families of Rocky Jones and Kayla Mueller, a service member's reunion with his family. That's her legacy. The conservatives will make the case that each time the Democrats didn't stand to applaud some of these people, that they are opposed to that. That's how the game of politics is played.
That's right. And that's the baiting that he was setting up. This entire speech was to bait the Democrats into this kind of reaction, instead of perhaps the Democrats saying, if you want to have a full and frank discussion about health care, you're not trying to protect pre-existing conditions. On education, they can make a case, but instead of rebutting him on those things that they say privately, this is what Americans really care about, they basically fell into the trap he was clearly laying by, as you said, Nora, talking about issues that Americans care about: education, health care, bringing the troops home. Those are right down the middle. Yeah. Democrats may disagree with how he's doing it, but the topics he was focused on down the middle.
And this all started in the White House in October, when Speaker Pelosi, who's repeatedly said she prays for the president every night, took him on. Took him on. She got up at a meeting, we have the picture from that night, and she pointed at the president, and she said, all roads lead to Putin.
Yes.
And then the White House released this photo. And this has been the moment since they have not spoken, and the impeachment of the president. And this sets up the most powerful woman in Washington and one of the most powerful women in the world against the commander-in-chief and one of the most powerful men in the world. That's the clash that exists that we witnessed tonight.
And that moment was about national security and the president's snap decision at that time to pull out U.S. troops from Syria without really a plan to follow it. He's since reversed it, slowed it, changed it. There was kind of a hole in the speech. You know, the president painted himself as the architect of the great economy that we are in right now, but he didn't really put himself as architect of any major diplomatic wins. North Korea was not mentioned anywhere in that speech, which is pretty remarkable. And on China, he said our relationship has never been better. His Secretary of State said last week there's no bigger threat to the United States than the Communist Party there. I thought it was interesting for someone who, as Commander-in-Chief, exudes strength, which in Speaker Pelosi, in that moment, she was standing up on a matter of saying, no, you can't undercut the U.S. military in Syria, that the president who positions himself as that in this moment kind of pulled back. He didn't have any major diplomatic win. He had kind of a moment, it seemed like an offer to Iran after saying that he had killed Qasem Soleimani.
And to contextualize that, because when withdrawing the U.S. troops from Syria, the idea was that it would strengthen Russia's position in the Middle East.
And Iran. Yes.
I want to bring in Ed O'Keefe, who is in New Hampshire tonight, was in Iowa late last night, as he follows, of course, the Democrats' race for president. Ed, any more new numbers tonight from the Democrats in Iowa? Any closer to finding out who won the first in the nation caucus?
We have a team, Nora, in Iowa and in New York and Washington hitting refresh on the Iowa Democratic Party page, and we have not seen new digits since earlier today when they released 62% of the findings. Pete Buttigieg, the former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, maintains a slight lead, and Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont is in second place. He's here tonight talking about the economy, giving a response to the president. The campaign continues tomorrow.
All right, Ed, thank you on the campaign trail. I want to thank our entire CBS News team, Ben Tracy, Nancy Cordes, Ed O'Keefe, Nicole Killian, Margaret Brennan, and John Dickerson. For all of us here at CBS News, thank you. Our coverage continues now on our 24-hour streaming news network, CBSN. And there will be more on your local news on the CBS station. I'm Nora O'Donnell, CBS News.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. Thank you for joining us. President Trump delivered his State of the Union address. He spoke for roughly an hour and 20 minutes. Vice President Mike Pence and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi were seated behind him for the entire duration. As is tradition, the president kicked off his remarks by stating, "The state of our union is strong." The address touched on a range of issues. President Trump devoted a significant amount of time to the U.S. economy before launching into health care and immigration. The White House invited numerous honorary guests to sit in the chamber. The list included military families, those impacted by the opioid epidemic, and a U.S. Border Patrol agent. Rush Limbaugh was also in attendance. The radio host was recently diagnosed with cancer. He was awarded the Medal of Freedom during the remarks. After the address, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi swiftly tore up the speech. You can see her here ripping the paper the president's remarks were written on. Democrats then issued a swift response in the moments following. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer delivered the remarks from Lansing.
We and all Americans might be weary of today's politics, but we must stay engaged. Our country, our democracy, our future demand it. We're capable of great things when we work together. We cannot forget that despite the dishonesty and division of the last few years, and that we heard tonight from the President of the United States, together we have boundless potential. And young Americans are proving that every day.
If you missed President Trump's address, here are some of the highlights.
The vision I will lay out this evening demonstrates how we are building the world's most prosperous and inclusive society. In just 3 short years, we have shattered the mentality of American decline. In 8 years under the last administration, over 300,000 working-age people dropped out of the workforce. In just 3 years of my administration, 3.5 million people, working-age people, have joined the workforce. We are doing numbers that no one would have thought possible just 3 years ago. Likewise, we are restoring our nation's manufacturing might. Many politicians came and went, pledging to change or replace NAFTA, only to do so, and then absolutely nothing happened. Days ago, we signed the groundbreaking new agreement with China that will defend our workers. A good life for American families also requires the most affordable, innovative, and high-quality health care system on earth. To those watching at home tonight, I want you to know we will never let socialism destroy American health care. I was recently proud to sign the law providing new parents in the federal workforce paid family leave, serving as a model for the rest of the country. We are working on legislation to replace our outdated and randomized immigration system. The United States of America should be a sanctuary for law-abiding Americans, not criminal aliens. As we defend American lives, we are working to end America's wars in the Middle East. As the world bears witness tonight, America is a land of heroes. Tonight, we have a very special surprise. I am thrilled to inform you that your husband is back from deployment. He is here with us tonight, and we couldn't keep him waiting any longer. And my fellow Americans, the best is yet to come. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America. Thank you very much.
Let's bring in our panel, Leslie Sanchez, Joel Payne, and Molly Hooper. Leslie is a CBS News political contributor and Republican strategist. Joel is a CBSN political contributor, Democratic strategist, and former Senate leadership aide. And Molly is a CBSN political contributor and veteran Capitol Hill reporter. Welcome to all of you. There is so much to get to, so I just want to very quickly get each of your takes on your thoughts on what we saw tonight.
It was the Hallmark movie of State of the Unions. In other words, you get a car, you get a gift. Here's your deployed husband. Here's your opportunity school choice scholarship. Here, and I mean it in kindness, but it was really this surreal environment where it was made for TV movie, and I think in many cases it was produced extraordinarily well. On the positive side, this is exactly the type of commander-in-chief that Republicans have been waiting for. They've been waiting for the president to step in to a role, tout the accomplishments of the economy, how they can work together, and get rid of the shenanigans. And for a moment tonight, you really saw that the president looked competitive. Now he's serious about moving forward and getting into this race.
Joel?
I agree with what most of Leslie just said. I thought, and look, this is going to upset some of my liberal, progressive friends, but this really was this speech. I want to be very clear. This speech and the performance of this speech was Donald Trump at his best. He cannot. I'm not talking about the content, which I would love to dig into, and I know we will. But the actual administration of this speech, I've never seen him feel this comfortable delivering his message. He wove in and out of some of his partisan, hard right policies, along with some of those middle outreach policies. And I really thought that he found the right pitch to set the stage really for his 2020 campaign. Now, it does not match up with his record, and we are going to dig into that. We're going to talk about
that. Molly?
Wild. I mean, wild. Yeah. It was. I mean,
you've been covering Capitol Hill.
I've been covering Capitol Hill for a long time, and that was a performance. That was a performance. Yes. It was a showstopper. Again, right. Hallmark, made for TV movies. He kind of took all of the issues that Congress has hammered him on, like the Iranian Soleimani, and some other issues, and he just turned them around. He had the opportunity zone with the school funding, and you're going to get a scholarship, and then he goes to the Tuskegee Airmen with the grandson who's going to be in the Space Force. I mean, 3 standing ovations. It was just, it had it all. Right. And it had Nancy Pelosi ripping up the speech at the end, and it also had a number of Democrats getting up and walking out when the president mentioned, I want to protect your First Amendment rights and the Second Amendment. When he got to gun rights, several Democrats got up and walked out. Somebody in Pelosi's box protested and was taken out of the chamber. So he was really goading these Democrats in a way that ostensibly seemed, oh, this is this great story, but he was pushing every button.
Yes.
He kept pushing those buttons to the point that Nancy Pelosi ripped it up.
So I want to talk more about that moment. But first, let me turn to you, Leslie, and talk about the president touting the economy. He said during this speech that, quote, our agenda is relentlessly pro-worker, and then he cited a blue-collar boom. Very much in keeping with what we'd heard from the president before he was elected, and very much in keeping with the theme that we're likely going to continue hearing from this president. What did you make of this, very, very explicit push to, again, try to connect with those workers in places like Michigan, in places like Pennsylvania, in places where they have seen manufacturing jobs fall away?
You fall right into it. So it's the issue of manufacturing jobs. It's about keeping America competitive by producing more products in America or producing certain aspects of these so that companies are encouraged to remain in the United States and not produce these goods abroad. That was really what he was speaking to. I've been working in these trade agreements to try to encourage U.S. companies, make it conducive for them to stay here. We've been talking about different types of, even the education component and raising the level of education speaks to that vein of ensuring you have a quality workforce that can meet the demands of a global society. All that is entwined together to say we're going to look at the education components, we're going to look at the trade components, and we're certainly going to look at the company, the corporate components, reducing tax rates, for example, to make sure it's a good environment for business. All that together to keep our state economy strong.
So, Joel, even as the president, though, talked about a blue-collar boom, one can't help but think about places like Lordstown, Ohio, which saw a General Motors plant close, right? This is very much a symbol of manufacturing decay, some might say. What did you make of the president's comments there about the economy and also, in particular, really trying to reach out to those manufacturing kind of workers?
Yeah, again, and I don't think it matches up with the record. When you talk about, you mentioned the situation in Lordstown. You can go to Wisconsin and look at the Foxconn and Harley Davidson and some of those promises that he made really at the earliest points of his presidency. You look at the trade war that he waged primarily on the backs of farmers and people across the heartland, a lot of people in places like Iowa and Nebraska and places like that. So I think the president did a good job of framing that the way he wanted to frame it and creating a message point that he can sell across the country. But again, the record doesn't match up to it. Now, what Democrats have a challenge of are optics tonight. And I imagine you want to eventually talk about Nancy Pelosi and her ripping up the speech.
Let's talk about it now.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that a bit. Here's why. I understand the speaker's frustration. One of the reasons why she's been so effective at countering President Trump is because she's not allowed herself to be triggered by him. What you don't usually see is mad Pelosi. You see irritated Pelosi, who has a good way of countering the president and giving it right back to him, but you don't see her lose her cool. I would argue that she lost her cool. She allowed the president to trigger her, one, by snubbing her on the handshake, and then using very obvious message points in that speech that he knew would get under her skin, with the standing up and the sitting down and creating some really odd moments for the speaker and for her caucus and for all Democrats. But Nancy Pelosi walked right into that. And you know what she did when she ripped up that speech? She took all the wind out of the sail of Gretchen Whitmer, who was getting ready to give the Democratic response, which is what Democrats wanted to focus on. So instead of talking about that on Twitter and on shows like this, we probably spent the last 20, 25 minutes looking at replays of that clip. Oh my gosh, she ripped up the speech. What does this mean? She gave a quote about it. She stepped on her message. That's not something Nancy Pelosi normally does. She usually has discipline. Usually when you think about discipline, Nancy Pelosi has the upper hand on Donald Trump. That didn't happen tonight.
Yeah, and I wonder, Molly, if you could speak to that a bit more as someone who covers Capitol Hill, because that is something that very much is some might say out of character from what we've seen before.
Well, the only time I ever see her do something like that, it's very calculated and it's controlled. And what was unclear tonight was whether that was calculated.
Was it an unscripted moment?
Was it
We
an
don't know.
unscripted moment, or was it a play to her progressives that, yes, I'm still with you, even though we're having Gretchen Whitmer? You know, I'm not sure what that message would be, but I know that a lot of members of our caucus were very upset. Again, as I say, a number did get up and walk out, and if you watched at the end, usually both parties line that center aisle where the president exits the chamber. No Democrats, not one Democrat. I think maybe I might have seen Mike Quigley, but don't quote me on that. I'm sorry if it's not true. But that's just unusual. And so I'm not sure if she did it just as like, I'm with you, Democratic caucus, or not, but it was very unusual. And you're right, you don't really see Mad Pelosi. Now, we've heard stories about people who are on the receiving end of Mad Pelosi.
But that's behind closed doors.
But that's behind closed doors. In public, she's very calm, cool, collect. Even when she's whipping up votes on the House floor frantically, she's calm, cool, collect. And it did seem a bit out of character.
So, go ahead.
But I'm saying, but that contrast, that's the win, right? Trump held it together. He gave a compassionate speech.
He ignored impeachment.
He ignored impeachment. He stayed on the prompter. He was disciplined. He gave credit to numerous entities and individuals and talked about and lauded his accomplishments. And Pelosi looked bitter and mad. And that's the takeaway from tonight, regardless of how many times you spin it. And that's what's retweeted over and over again. And it's as cruel as it is and unfair. When women lose their temper like that, it looks so much worse from a gender perspective. I mean, it just looks like women lost her cool, Pelosi lost her cool, and she's never been somebody who's been categorized
well, but
that
what
way.
makes it unique is that she never loses her cool.
Right,
like
right.
that's it's not. I agree with you. You're right, and she faces a different test than her male counterparts, but she never loses her cool. That's why.
On that point, I want to read a note here, just a bit of context here from our Nancy Cortez, chief congressional correspondent, who weighs in with this observation that typically Nancy Pelosi is the one to urge her caucus to maintain decorum, as I'm sure you can attest to, having covered Capitol Hill, Molly. But she reminds us about a month and a half ago when she dramatically shushed Democrats who got too excited on the House floor directly after the impeachment vote, which we all remember.
Right.
And that was very much in keeping with what we thought.
Well, and even various parts of this speech tonight, there were moments, and you can see Nancy Pelosi, and having covered her, you know what she's doing. She was looking. I mean, she gives her caucus the stare of "Don't you say anything right now," and it's
a very effective stare.
Very effective, and that's why it was so unusual at the end for her to just kind of, I mean, and she didn't make this, I mean, she kind of made a huge deal about it, but she just picked up and just ripped it.
Yeah.
And she kept ripping it. Yeah. And it was a bit shocking.
It does, because it does seem like a response not just to Donald Trump, but to the soldier who's returning to his family,
and that's the point
to the
Republicans are
Tuskegee
making.
Airmen. And I know that wasn't it. We all know that wasn't it.
That is how it
I don't think it was it. But I think that's how the story can be told, because that's how the stagecraft played out.
No, listen, what it's about is when the president goes into California as a sanctuary state, and then he went into that whole diatribe about that undocumented immigrant about the brother, and then just the vicious killing, and it was all about California, and Nancy Pelosi had to sit there and just take it, and then he did it again.
We should say, though, there were grieving family members,
there absolutely
right?
were.
And we want to make very clear that we're sensitive about it. But the idea is that for her sitting there hearing some of the rhetoric, it's not the presence of the family members.
And I don't know, and I apologize if I gave that impression, because I think that's what actually kept her, the grieving families. I actually think that's what really kept her from being more animated behind him, because Nancy Pelosi, the thing about Nancy Pelosi is, if something happens to a member of the staff, for example, Nancy Pelosi is the first one to go to the floor, Republican or Democrat, and say the nicest things about an individual. When John Boehner's chief of staff, Paula Nowakowski, died, unexpected death. She was 40 years old. Nancy Pelosi gave one of the best eulogies I've ever heard. She's very cognizant of families and situations like that. But the president was targeted in some of these attacks he made on policies and aimed it directly at California.
And let's go ahead and talk about some of that policy discussion. Let's play some of what the president had to say regarding health care coverage for those with pre-existing conditions. This is SOT number 21.
I've also made an ironclad pledge to American families. We will always protect patients with pre-existing conditions.
So, Joel, remind us, in fact, the Trump administration is a party in this lawsuit.
Yes.
So explain for our viewers who might not be familiar with the backdrop
the
here.
president is trying to eliminate the Affordable Care Act, key parts of the Affordable Care Act, including the parts that protect people from, being kicked off of their insurance for pre-existing condition. And this is commonplace for the president to do this. We all know he likes to play fast and loose with the facts, and he did it again tonight, except he did a better job of masking it in rhetoric and in language tonight. The president has also, this Republican majority, how many times have they voted down the Affordable Care Act and some of these key parts of the Affordable Care Act? So again, there's rhetoric and there's reality. I think the president deserves high marks for crafting rhetoric in a way that would put Democrats in a box, but we can't forget the reality behind it, that it doesn't match up to his record.
All right, for more, let's go. I'm going to have you hold that thought for just a moment, because right now we want to go to Capitol Hill. Apologies, Leslie. Democratic Congressman Joaquin Castro is joining us now. He's also the chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. Congressman, thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So just your initial thoughts on what you saw this evening.
Well, the president came into the chamber under a cloud of impeachment, one of a few presidents in American history to actually be impeached in that very chamber in the House of Representatives. And what you basically saw was the president using division again, telling a lot of lies. One of the big lies he told was about protecting patients with pre-existing conditions, when, as you all mentioned, the administration has gone to court to strike down the Affordable Care Act. If that happens, then people with pre-existing conditions aren't protected at all. There certainly were some moments that were uplifting for the American people. The reunion of the soldier with his family, the honoring of a Tuskegee Airman, for example. There were some uplifting moments, but the president undercuts himself when he goes and fearmongers using brown immigrants to scare Americans, when he lies about health care, all of these things. All in all, it was pretty much more of the same from Donald Trump.
You talk about the president undercutting himself. I wonder what your thoughts are on House Speaker Nancy Pelosi tearing up the paper with the president's address.
Yeah, I didn't see it myself, but I was told that after the speech was over, I guess she tore up the speech. I think that it gets very frustrating. I know that it gets very frustrating for legislators to sit there year after year and listen to a president who has literally, since he took office, lied 10,000 times. 10,000 times he's lied on subjects across the board. And she was probably showing some of that frustration.
Did that undercut, though, Governor Whitmer's response?
I'm sorry?
Do you think that gesture, though, which was quite visible for all to see on live television, that gesture of the House Speaker tearing up the president's State of the Union address, overshadowed or undercut in any way Governor Whitmer's Democratic response?
I'm sure that it's gotten a lot of attention, but I don't think that it undercuts the response and the substance of that response and laying out Democrats' vision for the future of the country and for creating opportunity for all Americans.
The president spoke about providing health care for undocumented immigrants. Let's listen to what he said.
Over 130 legislators in this chamber have endorsed legislation that would bankrupt our nation by providing free taxpayer-funded health care to millions of illegal aliens, forcing taxpayers to subsidize free care for anyone in the world who unlawfully crosses our borders.
He spoke about California being a sanctuary state, Congressman. What's your response to that?
That this is what the president does over and over again. He uses brown immigrants to try to scare Americans. He talked about immigrants killing Americans, committing crimes, when in fact this is a nation of immigrants from people from all over the world, including Latin America, have helped build this country. The fact that those folks are the exception to the rule of a lot of great people, hardworking people, earnest people who come here and are part of this country. And many of the folks that he's describing, are actually asylum seekers, separate and apart from immigrants who have come to this country over the years. These are people that are fleeing very desperate and violent places. And so, again, it was the president trying to appeal to a primary base rather than bringing the country together.
The president, as you know, spent a bit of time touting the U.S. economy. What's your sense of whether or not Democrats should be paying more attention to that issue?
I think it's an issue that we've always paid attention to. We want to see Americans do well. They were doing well under President Barack Obama. Fortunately, the economy has in many ways kept up. But remember, this is also a president and President Trump who shepherded a tax bill that gave benefits to the very wealthy, the very elite in this country, that's contributed to the greatest income inequality that we've seen in this country for generations. The fact is that you have a lot of Americans that have a job but are still struggling to make ends meet. And so just because the unemployment levels are low, which is a good thing, and we should all celebrate that, and because the stock market is high, doesn't mean that the challenges of the economy and the challenges that American families face automatically go away.
I want to turn quickly to the 2020 race. Both you and your brother, former 2020 presidential candidate Julian Castro, are backing Senator Elizabeth Warren in the race. Why not support former Vice President Joe Biden, considering your brother served in the Obama administration as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development?
Yeah, listen, the Democratic Party has a wealth of great candidates. Once upon a time, there were 25 candidates that were running. We've still got some great folks that are running. We believe that Senator Warren is the person that provides the most inspiration for the country, that will help bring the party and the country together.
And lastly, the campaign arm of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus has met with several 2020 presidential candidates in recent days and weeks. Is the caucus close to making an endorsement?
You know, the caucus has the official policy part, which I'm chair of, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and then it's got a separate part, which is known as Bold PAC. And so that's separate and apart from the official CHC. I'm not sure what Bold PAC is going to do. I don't think that there's going to be endorsements soon, but Representative Cárdenas from California, Tony Cárdenas, is in charge of Bold PAC.
All right, Congressman Joaquin Castro, thank you so much, Congressman, for your time.
Thank you.
All right, let's turn back to our panel here. Leslie Sanchez, Joel Payne, and Molly Hooper. Interesting. I just want to see if you have any thoughts with respect to what we heard from Congressman Castro.
Very much admire Congressman Castro. We're both Texans.
Yes.
And I feel like it's difficult when you're talking about undocumented immigrants. One, I don't like when the president says illegal immigrants or illegal aliens. I think it's pejorative. It's really negative.
Although, as he and his supporters point out, that is the language.
I have argued this point for 20 years.
Yes.
I'm with
yes.
The better way to say it is undocumented immigrants. I'm going to just stand. I'm going to stand by that one. For the record, I'm going to stand by that one. But the bigger point being, there are some estimates that over $18 billion is spent on health care by taxpayers. Taxpayers pay $18+ billion to pay for the health care of undocumented immigrants. That's just a Forbes article that I'm talking about. There's numerous studies where that number floats around. That's what the president's talking about. And having done focus groups in San Antonio, in areas where the Castros represent, there's a fine line, even among Hispanic Americans who've been here 2, 3, 4 generations, when it comes to taxpayers paying for unlawfully entered immigrants. If you're talking about legal immigrants, that's a very different story, and access to health care for children and certain things that are here. That's where it gets kind of muddy. So I don't think that's a fair part. Pre-existing condition, I want to say this on that part. Republicans argued for pre-existing conditions when they were fighting for the Affordable Care Act. Molly probably remembers all this. That was one of the provisions that there was agreement upon. So to say you're arguing to eliminate Obamacare doesn't mean you're arguing to eliminate pre-existing conditions. That's something Republicans want to stay committed to. And I think it's a very positive thing. So I think those are quick wins that Democrats are trying to have, but they're not necessarily accurate.
Before I disagree with Leslie, I really appreciate you saying that about undocumented immigrants. That's important, and I'm glad you said that. I disagree with you on the point about I figured we want to bring some comedy here.
Yes.
So COMIT.
Yes. So maybe you get the D1 as well.
But in all seriousness, I think that the president is trying to have his cake and eat it too here. And I think that's what Democrats are pointing out, is that you can't get the rhetorical flashpoints of talking about, well, this is what we believe in, but you've had full control of the Congress. You've had many opportunities over the last decade plus to ensure this. Even before Obamacare, Republicans had an opportunity to move on this, and they didn't. And so that's the pushback from Democrats. But this is what we do. We go back and forth, and the voters will ultimately have to figure out who actually has done the work to provide that.
Well, and also the challenge that the Republicans had is that when you require that insurance companies take individuals with pre-existing conditions, that automatically raises the cost of the health care that you provide, and which is one of the arguments for the individual mandate, right? And so that's where the Republicans had a lot of problems, because yes, we can't get rid of pre-existing conditions, but how do we force these insurance companies to take on liabilities that are too expensive, well, ostensibly too expensive for them to take care of? And so that therein lies the rub, where you get like John McCain going to the floor and giving the thumbs down to the Republicans' plan. But I do think it's interesting that Democrats are seizing on it. Joel, as you showed us Senator Schumer's statement, Congressman Steny Hoyer, who's the majority leader, also put out a statement. Up at the top of the statement, he highlighted the president's, quote, divisive remarks on health care and his attempt to distract from the record of trying to take health care away from Americans with pre-existing conditions. Because if you look at what's going on with the court cases, that and the Trump administration is successful in undoing Obamacare, then pre-existing conditions is out the door. But how do you get it back in? That's the challenge.
Yeah. I want to ask about a specific moment that was talked about potentially ahead of time, but it was still, nevertheless, really fascinating to watch unfold. A Venezuelan opposition leader, Juan Guaido, was a guest of President Trump tonight. He received a standing ovation from both parties. Let's go ahead and watch some of that moment.
Here this evening is a very brave man who carries with him the hopes, dreams, and aspirations of all Venezuelans. Joining us in the gallery is the true and legitimate president of Venezuela, Juan Guaido. Mr. President, please take this message back to your homeland.
So, Leslie, this was a moment. It really